Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. And we got a World War III alert. Trump wants revenge after the humiliation of Ukraine. But before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, we warned Trump that acting tough with Yemen would go bad for him. We didn't want him to be humiliated like Joe Biden. We didn't want him to come out as a war-hungry maniac. That's what he sounded like. But after getting his butt humiliated in Ukraine, him and Putin had a nice phone conversation today. Putin got everything, he got nothing, and everybody's shocked. But he knew that was coming. So he was going to play tough in Yemen. But that's starting off bad for him.
Let's take you to Yemen, where the Houthis say there have been a number of fresh US airstrikes targeting them in several parts of the country. The Houthis are an armed group with close links to Iran. They do control large parts of Yemen.
Yemen's health ministry says at least 53 people were killed and dozens of others wounded over the weekend after the United States launched nearly 4 dozen airstrikes against the Houthis. More than 30...
U.S. ain't doing nothing but waste our money.
The United States, after conducting multiple rounds of airstrikes on Yemen, was met with grim news that cast a heavy shadow over its military campaign. President Donald Trump, who once pledged on the campaign trail to end wars and avoid unnecessary foreign entanglements, found himself confronted with the irony of his own military misadventure. Now facing the embarrassment of a retaliatory blow, Trump has chosen silence, likely a reflection of the dissonance between his former promises and the current reality. The Yemeni armed forces, undeterred by the overwhelming might of American firepower, launched a significant and qualitative counterattack. At OMT News, we're dedicated to bringing you sharp, no-nonsense analysis on the conflicts shaping Palestine, Yemen, and beyond. In a world where propaganda drowns out truth and narratives are manipulated to fit political agendas, we refuse to take the easy route. We don't do spin. We don't take sides. We dig deep, call out hypocrisy, and break down the complexities others ignore. But independent reporting like this doesn't thrive without your support. If you value balanced, unfiltered discussion, don't let efforts to silence voices like ours win. Like and share this video to push back against the algorithm and IDF internet bots. Subscribe to stay ahead of the conversation.
عدوانا سافرا على بلدنا خلال الساعات الماضية بأكثر من 47 غارة جوية استهدفت مناطق عدة في محافظات صنعاء وصعدة والبيضاء وحجة وضمار ومارب والجوف. وارتكب العدو الأمريكي عددا من المجازر، حيث أدى هذا العدوان إلى استشهاد وجرح العشرات في حصيلة غير نهائية. وردا على هذا العدوان نفذت القوات المسلحة بعون الله تعالى عملية عسكرية نوعية استهدفت من خلالها حاملة الطائرات الأمريكية USS هاري ترومان والقطع الحربية التابعة لها شمالي البحر الأحمر.
In a move that sent shockwaves across military and diplomatic circles, they targeted US aircraft carriers stationed in the Red Sea. The scale of their retaliation was unprecedented. 18 ballistic missiles, coupled with an array of drones, were launched with precision against US naval assets.
They've done it 3 different times now. They just did it again today. Trump has put himself in a bind. You're not going to be able to just fly planes and destroy Yemen and play tough. They're not going to stop. And what are he going to do? Have a peace negotiation with Yemen? No, he know how weak Putin is coming out on top after devastating the country, putting his troops in the field. Trump can't do that. But he did just to save face. Now he's getting totally humiliated.
Assets. It wasn't a one-off strike either. Within 24 hours, the Yemeni forces claimed responsibility for a second wave of attacks, intensifying the confrontation. Yahya Sari, the spokesperson for the Yemeni military, stated that missiles and drones were once again directed towards the USS Harry S. Truman and other vessels accompanying it. This wasn't just a military strike, it was a political statement. Sari made it clear that these operations would continue until Israel lifts its siege on Gaza. The message was loud and unyielding. Yemen would leverage its strategic reach to support Gaza and punish any perceived American complicity. This marked the scale and intensity of Yemeni retaliation, responding to the US-led aggression that had begun on Sunday afternoon. Yahya Sari emphasized in his statement that US-led forces had carried out over 170 airstrikes across different Yemeni regions. The level of devastation was brutal, with reports emerging of over 100 casualties, many of whom were women and children. Civilian structures bore the brunt, and there were harrowing accounts of residential areas being reduced to rubble. Sari's declaration wasn't merely about retaliation, it was about resilience. He reiterated that Yemeni forces would not hesitate to strike back, especially targeting enemy ships navigating the Red Sea and the Arabian Sea. The message was clear. These military operations would persist until Yemen's objectives were achieved. Meanwhile, there were circulating but unconfirmed reports suggesting that a high-ranking member of the Yemeni armed forces had been killed. Israeli media outlets ran with this narrative, though Yemeni military sources remained tight-lipped, neither confirming nor denying the reports. White House National Security Advisor Mike Waltz claimed that recent U.S. strikes had successfully taken out several Yemeni leaders.
This was an overwhelming response that actually targeted multiple Houthi leaders and took them out. And the difference here is, one, going after the Houthi leadership, and two, holding Iran responsible. It is Iran that has repeatedly funded, resourced, trained, and helped the Houthis target not only U.S. warships, but global commerce.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth further underlined the aggressive stance, vowing that the U.S. would continue with unrelenting strikes until Yemen ceased its attacks on U.S. interests and global shipping lanes.
The Houthi capital felt like an earthquake. Dozens and dozens of precision heavy munitions dropping precisely on the targets that we wanted to hit, sending a very clear message. And the message is clear to Iran as well. And the president said it in his truth. Your support of the Houthis needs to end immediately.
Yet this strategy faced significant criticism. Many observers viewed the campaign as excessive and counterproductive, especially as reports surfaced of American bombs striking critical civilian facilities, including hospitals and cancer centers. One particularly shocking incident involved an airstrike that targeted a medical facility, resulting in the deaths of several patients. Human rights organizations were quick to condemn the act, labeling it evil and inhumane. There was growing concern that the US military was deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure in an attempt to pressure Yemenis into withdrawing their support for Gaza. However, such tactics seemed only to fuel Yemeni defiance. In response, the head of the Yemeni government declared a ban on all American ships transiting through the Red Sea. This wasn't just a military retaliation, it was an assertion of sovereignty and resistance. The Yemeni leader spoke of a new nature of aggression by the US and warned that America would have to face the consequences of its actions.
سنواجه التصعيد بالتصعيد، هذا هو توجهنا. والبارحة قامت قواتنا المسلحة وعلى الفور بإطلاق الصواريخ.
There's a saying, power corrupts. Absolute power absolutely corrupts. And Trump, he not only got power, he has absolute power. So it went absolutely corrupt, war-hungry maniac, and he in a bind, can't win, too scared to fight Russia. Talk peace with Putin today, all nice conversation. Ukraine got nothing, they crying, Europe crying. But the revenge, you see, he's shaking Putin's hand, but at the same time, he knowing he gonna try to destroy Putin's allies in the Middle East. See, that's the U.S. plan. Okay, we're gonna beat up on the little guys in the Middle East, but they know they don't want to fight Iran. They scared to fight Yemen. Their only strategy is to bomb. That's not gonna work. That's not gonna work. But he gonna let Israel pull his ass. See, they may invade Syria. You know, that's probably what they're gonna do. Invade Syria. Say they fighting Al Qaeda. Maybe go try to fight Hezbollah.
والطائرات المسيرة للتصدي لتلك الاعتداءات والغارات والقصف الأمريكي على بلدنا. ولذلك فهذا خيارنا وهذا قرارنا وهذا توجهنا. طالما استمر العدو الأمريكي في عدوانه على بلدنا فبارجاته وحاملة طائراته وقطعه البحرية ستكون مستهدفة بالطائرات المسيرة وبالصواريخ، وأيضا مع ذلك سيشمله قرار الحظر في الملاحة البحرية طالما استمر في عدوانه، وهو الذي يسعى هو.
Trump's miscalculation, critics argue, could plunge the world into a deeper geopolitical crisis. Yemen, a nation that has faced years of blockade and bombardment, has displayed an uncanny ability to endure and strike back against far superior adversaries. This resilience could spell trouble for the US and its allies. One of the most immediate and tangible repercussions of this conflict has been the surge in global oil prices. The Red Sea, a critical artery for global trade, has become a dangerous zone, making shipping companies wary of navigating its waters. The mere threat of Yemeni attacks has already disrupted maritime trade. Reports indicated a significant spike in oil prices. During early Asian trading, West Texas Intermediate WTI crude futures rose by 1.5%, peaking at $68.19 per barrel, while Brent crude futures climbed by 1.42% to reach $71.58 per barrel before slightly receding. Natural gas futures also witnessed an upward trend, climbing nearly 1% to $4.14 per million British thermal units, MMB2. These spikes were further bolstered by China's announcement of a plan to stimulate domestic consumption, which added a layer of demand optimism. Positive economic data, including a 4% rise in retail sales over the first 2 months of the year, further reinforced this trend. Despite the escalating crisis, the mood within Yemen remained defiant. Millions took to the streets across Yemeni cities, demonstrating unwavering support for the Ansarullah-led government in Sana'a. These protests weren't mere symbolic gestures, but an emphatic rejection of Western aggression. Al-Sabain Square in Sana'a became a focal point, with throngs of people expressing solidarity with their leadership and condemning the US-UK attacks. Similar scenes unfolded in other provinces, with the crowd's message unified. Yemen would not bow to external aggression. These gatherings were more than protests. They were a manifestation of national resolve. At the same time, the brutality of US-UK attacks became clearer. Residential areas in Sana'a and Sada suffered heavy bombardments. The leader of Yemen's Ansarullah movement, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, called upon the Yemeni people to remain united and resilient. His message was one of courage and steadfastness. He urged citizens to hold rallies, emphasizing that unity was Yemen's strongest weapon in the face of foreign aggression. The battle lines were drawn, not just on the military front, but within the socio-political fabric of Yemen itself. The situation unfolding between Yemen and the United States in the Red Sea is a complex web of strategic interests, deep-rooted defiance, and historical legacies. For the Yemenis, the confrontation is more than just a reaction to military aggression. It's an existential struggle that ties into broader notions of sovereignty, resistance, and regional loyalty, particularly concerning their support for Gaza. The blockade on Gaza by Israel is perceived not merely as an act of aggression, but as an affront to a shared cause, and for Yemen, their military actions are a reflection of this enduring solidarity. When American bombs rain down on Yemeni soil, the strikes are not seen as isolated acts of warfare, but rather as attempts to dismantle their moral position, to sever the bond between Sana'a and Gaza, and ultimately to enforce submission. But submission isn't something that Yemen has ever embraced easily. Yemen's response to this fresh wave of US bombings is likely to be layered and determined, rooted in a historical pattern of resistance that has defined the nation's character for decades. The Yemenis, facing some of the world's most advanced military technologies, have nonetheless shown an ability to adapt, endure, and strike back, even when the odds appear overwhelmingly against them. It is this history that shapes their current mindset. Rather than perceiving the American strikes as unbeatable, the Yemenis are more inclined to view them as another chapter in a long narrative of struggle, one where persistence and strategic endurance eventually triumph. In the coming weeks, Yemen's response may manifest through a dual strategy. First, they are likely to continue their direct attacks on US naval assets in the Red Sea. The message from Sana'a has been consistent. These strikes are not arbitrary, but a calculated response aimed at pressuring Israel through indirect means. As long as Gaza remains under blockade, Yemeni attacks on Israeli-linked or American vessels may persist. Second, Yemen is likely to lean into asymmetric warfare tactics. If large-scale conventional confrontation proves unsustainable under relentless US bombing, The Yemenis might decentralize their operations, focusing on smaller, unpredictable assaults that are harder to counter. Drone attacks, hit-and-run missile strikes, and rapid dispersal of their forces are tactics likely to come into play, preserving their fighting capability while prolonging the confrontation. Yet the scenario where Yemen faces defeat is not implausible, though it's a complicated proposition. Relentless US bombing, sustained over time, could degrade critical infrastructure, weaken supply lines, and break key command structures. The US military, with its unmatched air power and technological prowess, could potentially inflict devastating blows that undermine Yemen's operational capacity. But even then, history suggests that outright defeat is less about military might and more about breaking the collective will of a people. And Yemen, with its deeply ingrained culture of defiance, is unlikely to capitulate easily. The resilience seen during the Saudi-led intervention, where despite years of bombardment Yemen refused to surrender, serves as a reminder that this is a nation conditioned to endure hardship. So, while physical defeat through relentless bombings is theoretically possible, neutralizing Yemen's will to fight is a far greater challenge, one that military force alone may not overcome. On the other side, the American calculus is complex and perhaps more politically tangled. The official narrative suggests that these operations are meant to safeguard international shipping and respond to direct attacks on US assets. But the deeper layers reveal an American policy landscape heavily influenced by its relationship with Israel. The blockade on Gaza and the resultant humanitarian crisis are undeniable facts, but instead of pressuring Israel to ease the siege, Washington seems locked into a strategy of defending its closest ally at almost any cost. This raises a profound question. Why is America choosing to unleash military might on Yemen, risking regional escalation, rather than demanding that Israel reconsider its approach in Gaza? Part of the answer may lie in the nature of US-Israeli relations, where American foreign policy has historically been shaped by a steadfast commitment to Israel's security. There's a long-standing perception within American political circles that supporting Israel is not just a strategic imperative, but a moral obligation. From this perspective, any threat to Israel, even if indirect, as in Yemen's attacks on Red Sea shipping, is treated as a threat to American interests. In Washington's calculations, defending Israel's position is synonymous with defending broader American influence in the Middle East. The message is that any challenge to Israel's regional dominance cannot be tolerated, even if it means launching a military campaign against a country like Yemen. But it's also about the optics of strength. America's political leadership may believe that failure to respond decisively to Yemeni attacks would project weakness, potentially emboldening other adversaries. The logic is that a harsh military response not only punishes Yemen, but also sends a message to other regional players, like Iran or Lebanese resistance groups, about the risks of challenging US strategic interests. Yet this approach also exposes a contradiction. By choosing military force over diplomacy, America is risking an extended conflict that could destabilize the Red Sea, a critical artery for global trade, and spike oil prices, thus causing broader economic ripples. Still, there's a compelling argument to be made that America's actions are driven not just by loyalty to Israel, but also by a desire to control the strategic narrative in the Middle East. By positioning itself as the enforcer against any disruption in global shipping lanes, the US aims to reaffirm its status as the dominant power in the region. This is less about Israel alone and more about maintaining the architecture of American influence across the Middle East. Yemen's challenge by striking US naval assets is seen as an unacceptable assertion of independence and attempt to shift the balance of power, however small. Thus, the American military response becomes as much about preserving geopolitical status as it is about defending Israeli interests. However, this calculation is fraught with risks. Prolonged military operations against Yemen, especially if they result in high civilian casualties, could erode America's global standing. The longer the bombing continues, the more likely it is that international voices will question the proportionality and morality of the strikes. Humanitarian concerns could snowball into diplomatic pressures, especially if media coverage begins to show the extent of civilian suffering. In such a scenario, America's position could weaken, not just diplomatically, but also morally. And herein lies the real dilemma. America might be able to degrade Yemen's military capability, but winning the broader battle of narratives is another matter. The longer the conflict drags, the more resilient Yemen's narrative of resistance becomes, especially as it ties itself to the cause of Gaza, a cause with deep resonance across the Arab world. Defeating Yemen militarily does not necessarily mean silencing its ideological defiance, and it certainly doesn't guarantee that the root cause Israel's blockade of Gaza will be resolved. In fact, the brutality of the strikes could backfire, entrenching support for Yemen's cause and complicating America's position in the region. So, while the military theater may seem one-sided on paper, the reality is far murkier. Yemen has learned over years of war that survival is a form of victory, and endurance is a strategy. America, on the other hand, faces the challenge of reconciling its immediate military objectives with longer-term strategic realities. Whether relentless bombing can truly force Yemen into submission remains uncertain. But the deeper question is whether such a strategy can sustain American interests without triggering broader regional instability. And if America's goal is to secure peace, then perhaps the harder but more enduring solution lies in pressing Israel to lift the Gaza blockade, resolving the very crisis that fuels this conflict in the first place. Until then, the bombs will fall, ships will be targeted, and the cycle of defiance will continue.
Assault on Yemen. What did they achieve? Much Right, so the aid blockade of Gaza had gone on for long enough. The Houthis of Yemen gave Israel 4 days to lift that blockade, a violation of the now defunct Gaza ceasefire as that was, or they would renew their blockade of Israeli shipping on the Red Sea and surrounding waters. Only Israeli shipping. As it happens, despite that declaration, no such shipping actually tried it on. There were no ships for the Houthis to actually stop. Cue, however, the big orange man baby presiding over the United States, though, to take that warning and decide to act on it himself regardless, with other nations such as the UK playing lapdog in that, and launch a massive assault on Yemen. What did they achieve? Much the same as Israel has in Gaza overnight. Casualties mainly consisting of innocent civilians, not the Houthis, because the West lacks intelligence on Houthi movements and Houthi targets. But while the Houthis had made an announcement of intent against Israeli shipping, merely symbolic as that had actually turned out to be, no such targeting of US assets in the area had been made until Trump decided to paint one on his own shipping. A disproportionate and unprovoked response from the United States, which launched a series of airstrikes on Yemen, targeting civilian infrastructure and killing dozens, was never going to go unanswered. The Houthis just aren't built that way. Completely undeterred, they retaliated with precision strikes on US warships, most notably the USS Harry S. Truman, once more, signaling their resolve to meet escalation with escalation, and there is no US target too big for them to have a go at. And in their case, at least, they knew exactly where to strike. Right, so the US decision to launch airstrikes on Yemen was not only disproportionate, but also utterly, completely, strategically, and in a historical sense as well, absolutely stupid. But then this order came from Donald Trump. The Houthis, or Ansarallah, had announced their intention to blockade Israeli shipping in the Red Sea as a form of solidarity with the people of Gaza, who have been subjected to a criminal blockade of aid into the Strip in violation of the Gaza ceasefire agreement. Houthi leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi had given Israel 4 days to lift it, or they would resume the blockade of Israeli shipping. That said, though, even after the 4 days expired and the Houthis pledged to make good on their word, they had not actually stopped any shipping at the time of the subsequent US-led attack on them. The US airstrikes, which targeted civilian infrastructure in Sana'a and other parts of Yemen, were carried out despite a glaring lack of intelligence on the whereabouts of Houthi leadership and military assets. The US and its allies were effectively firing blind, therefore, attacking as they have before, with little care actually given to the impact their strikes would have on the ground, where they actually struck, who would actually be struck in these attacks, and an investigation into the criminality of those strikes absolutely needs to be carried out, because the Houthis were once again largely left completely operational, whilst dozens of civilians, mostly women and children, were killed in those attacks. What makes the likes of the US and UK forces any better than Israel and Gaza in relation to these attacks then? Not much in my view. The strikes also targeted critical infrastructure, further exacerbating the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Yemen, which has already been described as the worst in the world by the United Nations. The US-led airstrikes killed at least 53 people across 47 separate airstrikes and injured dozens more. Many of the victims were civilians who had no connection to the Houthi movement or its military operations whatsoever. Amongst the targets that were hit in these airstrikes, and as an underlining of the fact these were not Houthi targets at all, American fighter jets apparently bombed a medicine warehouse and a cancer center in Yemen amidst ongoing assault. There were also reports of the US airstrikes indiscriminately striking civilian targets across northern Yemen, particularly in its capital city of Sana'a, where the electrical grid was repeatedly struck. Again, a civilian target. Alan, you're going to knock the power out to Yemen now, are you? Much like Israel have knocked the power out to the Gaza Strip. It's not for the first time either that that grid has been aimed for either. When speaking about the humanitarian crisis in Yemen, though, it's easy to blame the Houthis for this, perhaps, but hold that thought. The US has long been complicit in the suffering of the Yemeni people, primarily through its support for the Saudi-led coalition, which had been waging a brutal war in Yemen since 2015, instigated by the Yemeni president in the face of the Houthis' insurgents there. That failed. The Houthis are entrenched. The Saudis gave up and went home, unable to beat them. The recent US airstrikes, therefore, represent a continuation of this same pattern of violence, but to no greater avail, with the US once again prioritizing its own interests over the lives of Yemeni civilians, its interests being tied up with that of Israel. It might have been all about the Houthis once upon a time, but they weren't the ones being targeted in these indiscriminate airstrikes. They have been the ones standing up for international law and Gazan solidarity, while the US and the UK kiss Netanyahu's backside as he commits genocide. But the thing with the Houthis, whatever you think about how they rose to power in Yemen, their prominence there now and their prioritization of standing by Gaza over their own needs, so often they are still supported in the streets by the people of Yemen, and they simply won't let a thing like this go. The Houthis' response to the US-led airstrikes was swift and decisive, and they knew exactly what they were going to hit. Because in a series of carefully coordinated attacks, they targeted US warships in the Red Sea, most notably the USS Harry S. Truman, a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, the biggest, most powerful ship out there right now. And this isn't even the first time the Houthis have gone after it. Following those 47 airstrikes by the US, were US-led, unprovoked as they were, let's not forget that the Houthis hadn't yet targeted any shipping. I'll reiterate that point. None of the shipping they said they were going to target, Israeli shipping, had been targeted because there hadn't been any. But the Houthis then launched 3 separate strikes on the Truman within a 24-hour period with cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and drones, demonstrating their ability to challenge US military dominance in their region, on their own turf as it is. As is typical of the Houthis, though, they've issued several statements between their attacks. The latest, which came this morning, read, "Over the past few hours, the Yemeni armed forces have successfully targeted the US aircraft carrier USS Harry S. Truman in the northern Red Sea with 2 cruise missiles and 2 drones, and targeted a US destroyer with a cruise missile and 4 drones. The targeting of the aircraft carrier is the 3rd in the past 48 hours. The enemy was struck by a state of confusion, which prompted many of its warships to retreat towards the northern Red Sea region, and an air attack that was being prepared against our country was thwarted." This, of course, followed those 2 earlier and actually larger attacks on the warship and its accompanying vessels. The Houthis have pledged to meet escalation with escalation, and they have the military capability to back up this threat, which is still underestimated by the likes of the US. Their capabilities, despite being one of the poorest nations on earth, to target a US aircraft carrier, one of the most heavily defended and armed military assets in the US military arsenal, is a testament to their growing sophistication and their resolve. It also underscores the futility of the US's strategy of using military force to try and achieve its objectives, I should say, versus the Houthis. Now, of course, the US has long accused Iran of supporting the Houthis in all of this, both financially and militarily, and this is how they are able to do such things, and this is a narrative that has been amplified in the wake of the recent escalation. The toxic tangerine that is Trump himself got a bit vocal over on Truth Social about all of this. You can imagine him stamping his tiny feet and balling up his tiny hands in fury as he furiously typed out his response, which read, "Let nobody be fooled. The hundreds of attacks being made by Houthi, the sinister mobsters and thugs based in Yemen, who are hated by the Yemeni people, all emanate from and are created by Iran. Any further attacks or retaliation by the Houthis will be met with great force, and there is no guarantee that force will stop there. Iran has played the innocent victim of rogue terrorists from which they lost control, But they haven't lost control. They're dictating every move, giving them the weapons, supplying them with money and highly sophisticated military equipment, and even so-called intelligence. Every shot fired by the Houthis will be looked upon from this point forward as being a shot fired from the weapons and leadership of Iran. And Iran will be held responsible and suffer the consequences. And those consequences will be dire. Well, if Trump wants to go to war with Iran on such claims, that he can bin his claims to be someone who ends wars and doesn't start them, because I think it's rapidly becoming clear that Trump is quite happy being yet another warmongering US president. Iran, for its part, has denied any involvement in the Houthi attacks and has warned the US against further escalation. The head of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, Hossein Salami, vowed a devastating response to any US or Israeli attack on Iran. This warning reflects Iran's growing frustration, of course, with always getting the blame for everything from the US, the boogeyman as they are so often made out to be, and ultimately does nothing to reduce the risk of a broader regional conflict. If Iran and the US do end up taking lumps out of each other in due course, things will get a whole lot worse. The US's decision to launch airstrikes on Yemen, despite the lack of a clear justification, reflects that pro-Israel broader strategy of using military force to assert dominance in the region. But it has never worked against the Houthis before, and not many are going to think it's going to change going forwards either. The strategy has repeatedly failed to achieve its objectives. The Houthi retaliation, particularly the strikes on the USS Harry S. Truman, represent a significant challenge to US military dominance in the region, and the arrogance of the likes of Trump and his hangers-on, still acting in a manner of, who do these people think they are to stop us, kind of underlines that. But also their continued underestimation of Houthi determination and capability. The recent escalation in Yemen is a tragedy, and instead of winning condemnation against the Houthis, it will have more people sympathizing with them and against the pro-Israeli atrocities committed by Western forces, even amongst people living in the West. The idiot Trump brought Houthi attacks down on himself. He's achieved nothing except to lose more support for his pro-Israel stance and a bill for the damage done to his shipping. What an embarrassment he is. Meanwhile, Trump has attempted to move on with his Gaza deportation plans as well. He was hoping, finding new locations to send the 2 million people of Gaza somewhere else, looking at East Africa this time as it happened. Well, it didn't work out too well for him. Little wonder, I suppose, he greenlit Israel to break the Gaza ceasefire officially overnight, the madman. But if you want another laugh at another Trump fail, check out this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share.
In 2024, all to protect. Come see us on tour in Hartford, Connecticut, Syracuse, Atlantic City, Levittown, Cohoes, Providence, San Jose, Toledo, Ohio. Go to jimmydore.com for tickets. So Trump is starting another war. He's bombing. I've ordered the United States military to launch a decisive and powerful military action against the Houthi terrorists in Yemen. Do you remember him running on that?
Salute, Quinn.
Do you remember him running on? I don't remember him running on. Hey, by the way,
Gulf of America or Greenland or this?
Yeah, I don't remember him saying, "Hey, if you elect me, I'm going to get us back into those Middle Eastern wars at the behest of Israel," because that's what this is.
Also, one little note: they're not called Houthis, and they're also the legitimate government of Yemen, as voted for by their people, and not the puppet state that's in one tiny corner of Yemen. They're not called Houthis.
War criminal. We're gonna keep calling them out over here. We're not hypocrites. We the only ones not hypocrites. We don't like imperialism and war hungry BS. We don't like that type of talk. Seizing Greenland, that's disgusting. Taking the Panama, disgusting. All hell breaking loose in Gaza, that's ridiculous. Criminalistic BS. But you know, we'll make you laugh, make you cry. He will be humbled with this Yemen adventure. And we're going to be right here. Hope he get his mind right and not do what the fuck we voted him in office to do. But the Zionists control the U.S. military and the presidency, and we clearly see that.
You know that?
So I didn't know that. They have waged an unrelenting campaign of piracy, violence, and terrorism against American and other ships, aircraft, and drones. Okay, that's largely bullshit, but I'm going to explain it to you in a second. Joe Biden's response was pathetically weak, so the unrestrained Houthis just kept going. It's been over a year since a U.S.-flagged commercial ship safely sailed through the Suez Canal, the Red Sea, or the Gulf of Aden, the last American
failure. He never gonna be able to stop the Houthi rebels, but he gonna have to stop them now because he said he was. He said everything Biden did was a failure. Now he gonna have to stop them. How can he stop them? How can he stop them? You can't stop them with your aircraft carrier. All you're going to do is get some sailors killed sooner or later. And just think about that. If they sink an aircraft carrier, that's 5,000 sailors there. He declared war, and then you got to send your troops to Yemen. They ready to die. U.S. military not ready to lose thousands of soldiers. Way more than Afghanistan and Iraq. They ain't got shit on the Houthi rebels, and they wasn't ready. They folded like lawn chairs. So what Trump did was back himself to a corner because Putin humiliated NATO. He didn't have to see what happened when you want to be the president. He should have sat on the sidelines because now he got to try to get some respect for Joe Biden. He keep bringing up Biden was weak. Now you're positioning yourself to get humiliated. He told us you was going to get peace. That was all a fantasy because the Zionists control the U.S. presidency. That's clearly what's going on. And he only could, that's why I say he might fight Yemen, because he definitely not going to fight Iran. That would be the end of our economy and everything.
American warship to go through the Red Sea 4 months ago was attacked by the Houthis over a dozen times, funded by Iran.
No more nobody for the U.S. to bully. They ran out of people they can bully. Ain't no more, none of that. That's over. The time in history, that's over with. There is no easy nothing for the U.S. Any type of war, whoever they choose, it's going to cost them big time. Bunch of fucking body bags. No games. That's over with. And that's they need to humble their motherfucking self. They're not like Russia and Putin. They're not ready to lose 100,000 to get the big win. Fuck no. Hell no. They're not ready to lose that. That was been talking tough. Bodies come back, then they crying. They won't put this is U.S. all about. Cause why? Because everybody, I tell you this, everybody want to come home for Christmas, want to get out, come, just do their little tour and come home. Man, ain't nobody Russia, China, Iran, Yemen, they're not worried about Christmas or coming home to see the kids. Trump in over his head.
Iran, the Houthi thugs have fired missiles at U.S. aircraft and targeted our troops and allies. That's like, after we bombed the shit out of them. The biggest bombing campaign and wipeout of a people was Yemen up until October 7th. Up until this most recent thing with the Palestinians, where they're ethnically cleansing and genociding them, and just bombing mostly women and children. It was Yemen.
Saudi Arabia humiliated them, humiliated the United Arab Emirates, humiliated Sudan. I think Egypt didn't send no soldiers. So Yemen just defeated all of them clowns militarily, wiped them out. While Britain, France, the U.S. was helping them target stuff. They just militarily defeated all those Arab phonies. They the Arab big dogs. That's real talk. The U.S. and Britain trying to create Arab leaders, and they ain't no leaders. They lost to Yemen in a fucking war. If you lose a war, it's supposed to go for you. That's why, see, they scared to fight Iran. Iran helped Yemen get strong enough to Iran know how to fight them dummies. Yemen is the big Arab power now, and they showing it. They not going to be defeated by the U.S. because they ready to die, and the United States not. See, that's what people like Iran and the people know that. They know that's their trump card. You not ready to die over this shit.
Yemen, and that was us doing it. We were doing it with Saudi Arabia. Okay, so again, this is all about fossil fuels. That's what this is all about.
Well, also,
and about Houthis, Israel, and about greater Israel.
I don't know what the right name for the Houthis is because it's hard to say, but the Houthis, they pull off the first successful naval blockade in recorded history.
Yes,
without having a navy.
So anybody who knows their mythology knows the Ides of March are all about betrayal, right? And everyone who thought that Donald Trump was the anti-war president needs to realize that he is against the previous wars just so he could start his own. That's what this looks like.
Yeah, we're breaking up with our side piece, Ukraine, and getting back with our first wife, Israel.
That's right.
It was fun while it lasted, baby.
The Houthi attack on American vessels will not be tolerated. We will use overwhelming lethal force, blah, 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 the choked off, blah, blah, blah. Our brave fighters, blah, blah, blah.
It's interfering with Israel. That's why they're doing it.
That says exactly. To all the terrorists, your time is up, and your attack. The terrorists. You mean the terrorists that we funded in Syria? You mean ISIS? You mean Al Qaeda, the ones we invented? And ISIS.
You should check and make sure Bibi ain't funding the Houthis because he has a history of doing stuff like that.
You mean like Hamas? You mean the ones that Benjamin Netanyahu funded? You mean those terrorists? So now all of a sudden, so that's the game. Just so you get it right. The game is anybody that we want to bomb and kill, we just call them terrorists. Anybody we want to deport or we want to put in jail, we say you're a terrorist. That's how it works.
Well, you know that guy they're deporting, they used the McCarthy-era laws that they used on Jewish Holocaust survivors that were leftists to call them commies and deport them.
So that's the irony. The only difference between Donald Trump and Joe Biden in this situation is that Donald Trump is aware that this is going on.
He doesn't have to have Tony Blinken do it.
Right. So Yemen, here's from antiwar.com. U.S. airstrikes kills 53, including women and children. Trump officials are threatening more airstrikes as the Houthis, officially known as Ansar Allah. That's what they're.
I can say that. I don't know why I thought of some. Yeah, I can remember Ansar Allah. Yeah.
They're vowing to a response.
Looks like you kids are getting drafted to go to Sandyland after all.
Looks like it. So I just wanted to show you this. So Thomas Massey says the military-industrial complex demands about $50 billion a year in war. As soon as we quit spending $50 billion a year in Afghanistan, we started spending $50 billion a year in Ukraine, just like I predicted. Watch where the next $50 billion a year goes when we stop spending it on Ukraine. The military-industrial complex is always hungry. Regarding U.S. activity in Yemen, I recently said to watch for a new military engagement to compensate for the pullback in Ukraine. The military-industrial complex demands $50 billion a year from our government, above and beyond what's necessary to defend our own country. So that Thomas.
What about our best friend and also aircraft carrier? You never had a friend / aircraft carrier, did you? That's why you don't get it.
Glenn Greenwald says the U.S. has been bombing Yemen since George Bush 43. Obama massively escalated it by aiding the Saudi war there and bombing himself. Biden bombed the Houthis 1,000 times in 2024 alone. So this idea that Trump is like, they're attacking us. No, we've been bombing the hell out of them, as usual.
Oh, but that's not the only thing Obama did. Obama put all of our life in danger as U.S. citizens when he killed Anwar al-Awlaki and his 14-year-old son, U.S. citizens who were in Yemen, and all Anwar al-Awlaki was doing was making YouTube videos that they said was radicalizing ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and Obama authorized a drone strike, which killed the preacher, the YouTube preacher, the American YouTube preacher in Yemen, and his 14-year-old son. Obama assassinated him. Now, U.S. presidents, if they deem that you are radicalizing anybody on YouTube, precedent has been set. You can be assassinated. It's a fact. Anybody look that up? Obama did that for American citizen who was preaching on YouTube in Yemen, had him and his son killed.
Usual.
Well, look. Once the Greater Israel Project is done, then we can stop doing
stop doing this. So here, let me finish this. Biden bombed the Houthis 1,000 times in 2024, all to protect Israel from its refusal to allow food and aid into Gaza. The reason the Houthis are attacking. That's why. So the Houthis have a brotherhood with the people in Gaza who are being slaughtered because they were the previous ones being slaughtered by the U.S. war machine. That's why. And
it's
so
sad they haven't allied themselves with a greater colonial power like the others, and then they're just sitting there trying to be principled.
So when they were
assholes.
So when they were starving the people of Gaza and slaughtering them, the Yemen people in Yemen said, "Hey, we're not going to allow your ships to go and do commerce with Israel as long as they're doing this slaughter." So that's where that comes from. So that whole story Trump told you was made up. It was all made up to make the United States a victim. We're not the victim. Of course we're not the victim. Justin Amash says, I'll say it again. It is unconstitutional for President Trump to engage in acts of war in Yemen. It doesn't matter how appropriate you think it is for the United States to take on Houthis or terrorists or anyone. Congress has not authorized a war in Yemen. Engaging in war there is unlawful. That's so. After 9/11, they gave a blank check to any president who wants to do a war, so Congress doesn't have to vote on it. So we didn't vote on the war in Libya. We didn't vote on the war in Syria. We didn't vote on the war in Ukraine. We didn't vote on bombing Yemen. We didn't vote on Somalia, the Sudan. We're not voting on any of this. And that's so nobody can be held accountable. That's what this is about. So Glenn Greenwald says this is how the DC war machine keeps the United States on a footing of endless war, ensuring the coffers of the arms industry are always full and its own authority always increasing. What Trump vowed to stop.
The Doge cuts are nonsense, it turns out.
That turns out. They're all distraction.
Whining about and defacing Tesla cars about.
That's a distraction.
All they did was take the money and from the thing that I guess the Hillary Satanist cabal wants to do what Bibi Netanyahu wants. And they raised it $6 billion. So there's been no cuts.
No cuts.
It's all bullshit.
There's been absolutely, that's right. So Trump endorsed raising the military budget, $6 billion. So all the cuts. So if we had, by the way, I want to say this to Glenn Greenwald. If we had to sit around and wait for congressional approval for every war that somebody comes up with, it would take at least another 45 minutes. Anyway, so this is from antiwar.com. A major round of U.S. airstrikes that hit Yemen on Saturday killed at least 53 people, including women and children. According to Yemen's Saba news agency, at least 5 children and 2 women were among the dead. Another 98 were wounded by the U.S. bombing, and the health ministry said many of the casualties were civilians, while the United States is claiming it killed multiple leaders of Yemen's Houthis, officially known as Ansar Allah. Oh, yay. Yay. We're fighting terrorists. The United States...
If you block SodaStream from being sold in the U.S., you got to go.
Yeah. The United States is the world's terrorists. Jesus H. We bombed Yemen 1,000 times in 2024 alone. Okay? A total of 40 U.S. airstrikes were reported to hit Yemen, primarily focusing on the northern Sada governorate. Strikes also hit the Yemeni capital. Targets that were reported hit included power stations, residential areas, and homes, and some Houthi military sites. We love hitting residential areas because they don't shoot back. And they make perfect locations to put new smart cities, just like they do here.
Yeah.
The strikes marked the first time the United States bombed Yemen under the new Trump administration. Hip, hip, hooray. Hip, hip, hooray. The Houthis announced on Sunday that they fired back, with Yemeni military spokesman saying the aircraft carrier USS Harry Truman was targeted with 18 ballistic and cruise missiles, as well as drones. U.S. officials later told Reuters that the U.S. military downed 11 drones fired from Yemen and tracked 1 missile that failed in flight. The leader of the Ansar Allah, or the Houthis, said that in response to the U.S. airstrikes, both military and commercial vessels in the region will now be targeted by Houthi missiles and drones. So this is President Trump ramping up a war for no reason.
No, there's a reason.
Well, I mean,
Israel.
For no reason that helps.
Their economy's hurting.
Doesn't help the United States. Doesn't help our people. Doesn't help a worker.
Helping a friend doesn't help you.
Doesn't help
your best friend in the Middle East. Our only friend.
Our only friend. President Trump announced the start of the bombing campaign on Saturday and said the Houthis must stop their attacks on shipping and U.S. warships. However, Ansar Allah hasn't targeted any ships in months since it ceased attacks once a ceasefire deal was reached in Gaza back in January.
Wow. Why is there always a nice little cherry on top of the
that's
shit sundae in my mouth?
So that's what so there it is.
Oh, that's great. I love the Hassanabi is kicked off Twitch for promoting the Houthis. And the Houthis haven't attacked anyone after a ceasefire deal.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I'll give it to Hassanabi. He's smarter than Cenk ever was.
So again, that's all made up while Trump is bombing Yemen right now. That shows that's all made up. And we don't use real reasons to attack someone. We attack them. And when they attack us back in self-defense, we say they attacked us out of nowhere. We're like, the obnoxious women who try to get someone to punch them in the mall so they can sue them.
You do all those murders you want and take all my money to do it. And why should I have any say in it? Okay. But I don't want to ever hear about Putin ever again about how bad Putin is.
I mean, I know. Trump and other U.S. officials are also justifying the strikes by framing them as a way to protect global shipping. Although, and here's the part Trump won't tell you, critics are pointing out that the Red Sea being shut down has a minimal impact on the United States. What the media won't tell you is this shipping route is mainly used to get exports from Asia to Europe. Thomas Massey said on Twitter, its economic value to the United States is primarily in importing oil from the Middle East, but we can drill our own oil. Most U.S. imports from Asia come via the Pacific.
Well, what about Israel? Is he forgetting about Israel?
He's forgetting about Israel. Of course he is. During his previous administration, President Trump supported a brutal Saudi United Arab Emirates war against the Houthis and used his veto power to kill legislation passed by Congress to end U.S. involvement in the conflict. Isn't that interesting? According to UN members, which are considered a low estimate, the U.S.-backed war killed 377,000 people.
Oh, Trump's also locked in with Saudis. Don't just blame it all on Israel. Don't forget the Saudis.
Don't forget the Saudis.
Don't focus on one. We are beholden to all kind of foreign power.
And half of those people, half of the 400,000 people that we killed, half of them died of starvation. Okay. All right. But we're not the terrorists. Just so you know, we're not someone else is. The people in Yemen are the real bad guys on the global scale. The U.S.-backed Saudi war on Yemen involved a brutal blockade, a heavy bombing campaign, and a ground campaign. During that time, the Houthis only became a more capable fighting force.
Oh, maybe we'll recruit them to work for America one day.
So, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz says all options are on the table in responding to Iran. That's right, Mike. You're going to get us into a nuclear conflict to protect your pedo bosses one way or another, even if you have to kick the football yourself.
With all options for real, like maybe Mike Walls can suck one of their dicks and settle this down.
Saudi Arabian television reports that Israel convinced the Trump administration to attack the Houthis in Yemen as a first step in military action against Iran.
Oh, start doing push-ups, kids. You're the final countdown to Iran.
Get ready. Statement from
Well, all options are always on the table with the president, but Iran needs to hear him loud and clear. It is completely unacceptable, and it will be stopped. The level of support that they've been providing the Houthis.
Sending a very clear message. And the message is clear to Iran as well. And the president said it in his truth.
Look at all the United States warships that are there. USS Harry Truman, USS Sullivan's, USS Stout, USS Jason Dunham, USS... What in the F? What are we... I thought Trump was supposed to end that stuff.
The Jason Statham, I thought it said.
That's what I thought it said. The USS,
by the way,
the USS Gettysburg is there. What are we doing?
Well, here's my favorite part. We could not win a war with Iran. We haven't won a war with anybody in 80 years.
I know.
So all this confidence is amazing. What jerk off would run out and sign up to go do that? I'll bet you they'll find a lot.
Yes.
Your support of the Houthis needs to end immediately. We will hold you accountable as the sponsor of this proxy. And I echo his statement.
But us bombing Yemen 1,000 times, and then them abiding by the ceasefire that took place in January when Trump instituted, that's got nothing to do. So this is them finding a way to start a war with Iran.
Well, that's all well and good, but where's all that Epstein stuff we were supposed to get? I mean, look, are you protecting Israel until after we kill all them people?
We will not be nice about it. This is not the Biden administration. The message is clear.
Biden administration bombed Yemen 1,000 times in 2024 alone.
Until they got a ceasefire.
And then they got a ceasefire.
Well, I guess they're not being nice. I guess Pete, the Crusader Hegseth is being correct.
We will come after the Houthis until they stop shooting at our ships, and the Iranians better stay out of it.
Put this in context for me, because
so they did stop shooting at our ships. This is just you doing the bidding of Saudi Arabia now, and Israel.
Yeah, well, how do we get to Iran? How do we get to it?
Yeah, how can we get to Iran? That's exactly what this is.
Yeah.
So maybe a submarine goes down, maybe it doesn't come up.
Oh, wait, how do we get to war with Iran? That's what he said.
That's what he said.
How do we get to war with Iran?
How do we get to war with Iran? Could you send me that video, Malcolm? Please, pretty please. Can you send me that video? I want to play it.
There's got to be a way.
Scott Clausen, I think his name.
That's right.
Yeah.
U.S. intelligence has been suggesting for some time that Israel has the desire and intent to conduct an attack on Iran's developing nuclear program in the coming months. President Trump has extended an offer for negotiations. Have you heard anything back from Iran? Is this strike in Yemen a signal to Iran?
Iranians have supported the Houthis. They've provided them intelligence. They've provided them guidance. They've provided them weaponry. I mean, there's no way the Houthis, the Houthis would have the ability to do this kind of thing unless they had support from Iran. And so this was a message to Iran. Don't keep supporting them, because then you will also be responsible for what they are doing in attacking Navy ships, in attacking global shipping.
So this is how we get to war in Iran.
Finally, new Lindsey Graham is doing his job.
And now,
Middle East Lindsey Graham is telling it like it is.
That's right. Russia tells the United States to stop bombing Houthis. After Trump's first major strikes on Yemen's Houthis, killing at least 31 militants, Russia is now demanding the United States halt its military action and push for talks instead. Lavrov told Secretary Rubio that force should stop immediately, while Washington has warned Iran to stop backing the Houthis. This is how we get to war with Iran.
Meanwhile, every dumb shit liberal is worried about Elon Musk's Doge cuts that are not even going to happen.
They're not worried about this.
They're not even going to happen. I mean, USAID, great. The money doesn't go to them. It's going to go in the war machine. You should be complaining about Rubio, who I thought was under control, but I forgot they're all under control of our.
They're all under control.
Carrier.
That's right. Here's how we get to. Here's at the Washington Institute for Middle East Policy. This is so what he said a couple years ago is what's happening right now. Watch this.
I frankly think that crisis initiation is really tough.
Crisis initiation is really tough.
And it's very hard for me to see how the United States president can get us to war with Iran.
It's really hard. We got to get to war with Iran, but it's really hard for me to see how a president's going to pull this off. Well, they found this is how they're doing it. Listen to what he says.
Which leads me to conclude that if, in fact, compromise is not coming, that the traditional way of America gets to war is what would be best for U.S. interests. Some people might think that Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David mentioned. You may recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. Some people might think Mr. Wilson wanted to get us into World War I. You may recall he had to wait for the Lusitania episode. Some people might think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You may recall he had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode.
I like how he says we had to wait for it. We made it up.
We didn't go to war with Spain until the until the Maine exploded. And may I point out that Mr. Lincoln did not feel he could call out the Federal Army until Fort Sumter was attacked. which is why he ordered the commander at Fort Sumter to do exactly that thing, which the South Carolinians had said would cause an attack. So if, in fact, the Iranians aren't going to compromise, it would be best if somebody else started the war. One can combine other means of pressure with sanctions. I mentioned that explosion on August 17th. We could step up the pressure. I mean, look, people, Iranian submarines periodically go down. Someday one of them might not come up. Who would know why? We can do a variety of things if we wish to increase the pressure. I'm not advocating.
So there you go. So I just played that Pat Clausen guy. Here's another guy telling you years ahead of time what's happening right now. And Trump is the guy doing it.
Didn't intervene. He said, but one thing we did learn, he said, we learned that we can use our military in the region, in the Middle East, and the Soviets won't stop us. He said, and we've got about 5 or 10 years to clean up those old Soviet client regimes. Syria, Iran, Iraq, before the next great superpower comes on to challenge us. And it was like, I'm coming out of the Mojave Desert. I've been training troops. I haven't been thinking geostrategy for some time. And suddenly a guy just sort of shoves this nugget at you. Well, you remember it. It was a pretty stunning thing. You mean the purpose of the military is to start wars and change governments? It's not to sort of deter conflict. We're going to invade countries. And my mind was spinning. And I put that aside. It was like a nugget that you hold on to. This country was taken over by a group of people with a policy coup. Wolfowitz and Cheney and Rumsfeld, and you could name a half dozen other collaborators from the Project for a New American Century. They wanted us to destabilize the Middle East, turn it upside down, make it under our control. It went back to those comments in 1991. Now, did anybody ever tell you that? Was there a national dialogue on this? Did senators and congressmen stand up and denounce this plan? Was there a full-fledged American debate on it? Absolutely not. And there still isn't. And that's why we're failing in Iraq. Because Iran and Syria know about the plan. All you have to do is read the Weekly Standard.
So there you go.
By the way, the last time we fought a war in Iraq, Iran won the war and they weren't even in the goddamn war.
That's right.
How bad we are.
That's how bad we are. So, Trump is turning out to be just like Joe Biden when it comes to the Middle East.
I guess it's not, your money's not going to be wasted on Ukraine. It'll be wasted on Bibi Netanyahu's bucket list.
It's going to be wasted on Saudi Arabia and Bibi Netanyahu's bucket list, which is Iran.
Yeah. And your kids are still going to go die for this crap, too.
Yeah. Wait till they start sending your kids to die for it.
Zelensky said your kids have to, but again, Ukraine's our side chick. We're talking about our wife, Israel.
That's right.
Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, March 18, 2025, and our friend Scott Rader is back with us. Welcome back, Scott.
Thanks for having me.
Let's get started with this tweet that Donald Trump, he tweeted in 2019. He said the United States has spent $8 trillion fighting and policing the Middle East. Thousands of our great soldiers have died and been badly wounded. Millions of people have died on the other side. Going into the Middle East is the worst decision ever made. And here is 2025 and the new Trump 2.0, how do you find the way that he's trying to deal with the Middle East?
Stupid, asinine, insane. I mean, this is extremely disappointing because that Donald Trump was
extremely
updated. Look, let's just clear the air here, because there's a lot of people, out there. I told you so. I told you so. I knew best. And I'm like, well, screw you. So what? You're gloating because there's dead children? You're happy because there's dead children? I told you so. See, dead children. People that believed in Donald Trump were trying to avoid dead children. And there's just a lot of people out there that seem to be angry that at some point in time, I and others said, hey, why don't we give this a shot? Why don't we, take him at face value and see if in fact he's serious about doing this and promoting, the concept of peace.
And this
because
by the Zionists.
You can do better than going back to 2019, Nima. You know this. You know that recently, I think it was in December, he posted video clips of Jeffrey Sachs that was condemning Benjamin Netanyahu for getting America involved in those wars that Donald Trump was condemning. You know that, and your audience knows as well. All right? That's the Donald Trump I was supporting. The man that said, I'm not going to fall into the trap of Benjamin Netanyahu. I'm not going to get America dragged into yet another Middle East conflict, this time with Iran, that ends up with dead Americans, trillions of dollars expended. That's the guy that I was saying, all right, let's give this a shot. Let's see if he can do this. We always knew this was going to be tough. I mean, the United States is so deeply entwined, entangled in this Israeli mess, this Zionist philosophy, this, however you want to articulate what the state of Israel is, and how it has insinuated itself into the American body politic, that making peace was always going to be a mission impossible. I mean, but what was the alternative? I mean, the Biden administration was knee deep in a genocide of its own making. At least Donald Trump stopped the genocide. And I just challenge anybody to say it. He stopped it. Can you contradict me on that, Nima? Donald Trump stopped the genocide. Can you say no, he didn't? Don't tell me what happened yesterday. I'm talking about when he was the power behind bringing a ceasefire that had Palestinians dancing in the streets of Gaza in joy. Donald Trump did that. All right. Now, moving forward, he has to deal with the complexity of an Israeli government led by Benjamin Netanyahu, the man who Donald Trump singled out as being responsible for dragging America into war. So one would think that having articulated a posture that said, I know the problem, and the problem is Benjamin Netanyahu, and I'm not going to let him take me down the path of prior presidents whom I condemned for getting dragged in the wars, you could say, okay, if that's his foundation.
I think what the Zionists did was they made a deal in the U.S. government. What they did, Lindsey Graham, I should have known, Mark Rubio, I should have known those bastards was being way too nice about what was going on with Russia. Like something ain't right. It's something they wanted peace. They get rid of Zelensky. I think, oh, maybe they want war with China. No, the deal was already made. Trump just wanted peace with Russia. Do some business. To get the peace with Russia, they're going to start a war with Iran.
Thinking, then everything he's doing up here is tactical in nature.
To one they feel,
meaning that he's dealing with situations as they arise.
And what Russia got to understand, Russia done already set the rules of engagement too. When you see the U.S. and Israel is going to force, they're going to start a war. They ain't going to nuke Iran. But they, just like Russia beat up on Ukraine and drained it, they're going to do that. They're going to try to do that to Iran. And they're going to force Russia and all of the allies of Iran to feed Iran money and weapons. Remember, I told y'all this. And they've been working up to that by picking off Hezbollah, all their leadership, toppling Syria. They put Al-Qaeda in power, for God's sake. You know, stepping on Hamas. Now look what Trump doing, going after the Houthis. Now, he don't have no plan on taking them out all the way. Now, just weaken them. Just weaken them for when they get to Iran. They're going to Iran.
Complicated situations that no American president has been able to solve ever. And he's trying to move things. So you give him the benefit of the doubt. You say, well, that's a hell of a statement you made about Gaza there, putting 100,000 American troops in there and forcefully, evicting the Palestinians. How does that equate with what you said? Well, then you have to say, well, maybe he was looking for a counter proposal. And lo and behold, a counter proposal shows up and you say, ooh, maybe the concept of tactical maneuvering to achieve a strategic objective, maybe it makes sense. And so you go on and you see him, taking a harsh stance against the Iranians, irrationally harsh. But I mean, wasn't that stance he took about Gaza and the depopulation of Gaza irrationally harsh? And yet it resulted in a counter proposal. So you say, well, good Lord, okay, trying to look at past, actions. Maybe he's just setting the stage to compel Iran into taking a different tact, one that maybe the indirect approach. Again, because you're always scrambling, trying to figure out what the hell Donald Trump's doing, because his statements make no sense. They're way out here, except when you relate them to the foundational philosophy that you have articulated in your tweet. To avoid a war, you're like, gosh, how do we?
Trump can't threaten Iran into doing shit. He can't threaten. I mean, they can just go to war. Can't threaten. They're not going to change their mind because he said any goddamn thing. That's ridiculous, and they shouldn't do that. One way, that'll be the end of them. There's no more room for them. The American empire and the Zionists is at their door. All their allies, except the Yemen, have been toppled in the Middle East. All of them. Yeah, ain't no deal to make. Iran got to be ready to fight. See, the talk is over now. And that's why they set up Iran wanted to assassinate Trump. Never forget, they kept saying that over and over and over. They arrested some people when Trump was campaigning, Iranian assassins in America. That's all. I knew what they were doing. They was getting that all in the news media because they might whack them and say Iran did it. So there's going to be a war with Iran, whether Trump go to war itself or they whack him, and then they got to retaliate on Iran for whacking the president.
Square the two. We have to assume that what he's doing is not to get us into a war, but get us out of a war. Maybe recognizing the difficulty of American-Iranian relations right now, he's deliberately trying to drive the Iranians into the hands of the Russians. It appeared that's what they were doing. The Iranian president said, we will never deal with you, America, but we will deal with others. And, he was having a conversation with Vladimir Putin about how to resolve Gaza and how to resolve Iran. So you could, it's not a stretch of the imagination to say maybe he's punting to Putin, to let Putin take over this thing to achieve the ultimate result of denuclearization and peace. And then the Israelis break the ceasefire and bomb Gaza. This could have been stopped by Trump. Didn't have to happen. But it appears that the United States is 100% behind this action. And now we see the United States carrying out actions against the Houthi, because the Houthi, of course, have always linked their actions in the Red Sea as being linked to Gaza and the humanitarian situation there. And if Israel breaks the ceasefire, the Houthi begin attacking. So now we've doubled down on that, and it appears that we are moving in the direction towards conflict with Iran. So the very thing that Trump said he wasn't going to allow to happen, that he was cognizant of, the forces that drag us in that direction, and he gave it a name, Benjamin Netanyahu. He's basically allowed Netanyahu to put him in a position where America is heading towards another Middle East conflict that will cost American lives and bankrupt us. And this one could get even worse. This could be the ultimate bankruptcy machine. If we do, in fact, get into a major conflict with Iran, the impact on global energy security will be devastating and will have a horrific impact on the American economy at a time when Donald Trump can't afford to have that. All the changes.
That's their nuclear weapon. is to destroy the U.S. economy, and that's to block the Strait of Hormuz, bomb every oil field the U.S. tied to Saudis, United Arab Emirates, bomb to Qatar. They already said they're going to do it. They already said that's how they're going to make sure that if they got to go America, see, that's the end of America financially. Can America live not being up at the top no more economically? Hell no. They'll commit suicide anyway if they are not as rich as they used to be. So Trump needs to understand that the Zionists don't care. They just want Iran destroyed. They don't give a shit about America. Benjamin Netanyahu already said that.
He's trying to do, which I call revolutionary in nature, are predicated upon some form of economic stability, predictable economic trajectories. When you have, the price of oil shoot up to $120, $200 a barrel, it's going to be devastating. So I don't understand why he did what he did. This makes no sense. There's nothing about it that squares with the foundational philosophy that Donald Trump has been expressing over time since 2019 and up until recently, that said he wanted to avoid the very thing he's now has got us entangled in. I can't make any sense of it.
It's so amazing to see how Netanyahu has some sort of lot of leverage on the US government. And while he has a lot of problem in Israel, he's struggling and he's just fighting for his position. But he has a lot of leverage.
I disagree, though. I disagree. Netanyahu has no leverage, none. That's what makes this all the more stunning. If he had leverage, he would have told Steve Witkoff, get the hell out of my office, when Witkoff showed up and said, sit down, shut up, you're going to accept a ceasefire. If Netanyahu had leverage, he would have said, pound sand, leave. I will pull all the strings I can and bring your pathetic presidency down, because I am Benjamin Netanyahu. I am the Zionist king of the world. I control it. He controls nothing. Nothing. This is a self-inflicted wound, which is what makes it all the more amazing. Because you could explain away, say, well, at the end of the day, Donald Trump is controlled by Benjamin Netanyahu. He's not. Donald Trump can flick Netanyahu away like a pesky fly. This is a deeper issue. This has less to do with Netanyahu pulling the strings and everything to do with what's going on inside Donald Trump's brain. This concept of peace through strength. That's the problem. It's not Benjamin Netanyahu. Netanyahu is a nobody, a nothing. Literally, he has no power. You tell me, what can Benjamin Netanyahu do right now? Name one thing he could do right now that causes Donald Trump problems. Name it. Go. You can't. I can play the Jeopardy theme song all day long. You can't tell me anything. What? He can they can put $100 million into the congressional race. That ain't for 2 years. We just had the election. That card's been played. Done. He can impact the selection of the cabinet. Already been done. Miriam Adelson can make a phone call. She'll never get through. She already gave her $100 million. Too late. Benjamin Netanyahu can do nothing. Nothing. We can do everything. We can hit the off switch on everything and make that pathetic little nation go away. But we don't.
They can't, because they control this government.
We don't for a number of reasons. Because we are heavily addicted to Israel because of the political, insinuation that's taken place in America. But none of that prevents Donald Trump from saying to Netanyahu, sit down and shut up. We would not be where we are today had Donald Trump picked up the phone and said, hey, Bibi, open up the borders, let the humanitarian good in. That, or I shut off all the switches. I mean, it's the easiest phone call to make. He didn't make it. Why? Because Bibi has...
He blinded by not wanting to understand how deep the Israelis control America, because he still feels, America, I guess, as the white nation, they control Europeans, and the Israelis are really European. But what I understand, that's a fucking lie. You can't even be in the U.S. government unless Israel agree. And no U.S. president, no governor, no senator, especially the congressional raccoons, they'd never go. Nobody. You can't find nobody. How are you? Do you control a government where you can't even disagree with anything they say, or you don't get to be elected? See, this is the problem. You see, he talking about something that's going to go wrong with Donald Trump here. He is missing the real deep root of the problem, that they have been puppets See, all that he was doing, his inspector days, he was doing it for the small hats. None of that was for America, to make America safe. None of that work he was doing. It was all for Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu, which he's saying is nobody, is nothing. That's outrageously nonsense. He's the leader of the small hats. He's standing in power. He has the military on his motherfucking side over there. They already said that. They'll tear Israel apart if Benjamin Netanyahu got to step down. He refusing to be investigated, all that type of shit. So these people got to understand what they allowed to happen to America. He's talking about what can they do? Assassinate him. Would they try? What you mean? They done already put the assassination tips down on his ass. It's not Ukraine, it's them. They control Zelensky. He's part of that small hat mafia. You know, I don't know, Scott drinking on the goddamn job. He's missing the bigger picture. We understand that.
Has people all over him?
Nope. This goddamn country.
Because Israel provides the predicate for Trump's grand vision of stability in the Middle East. This is a Trump problem, not a Netanyahu problem. You see, Donald Trump has built a vision of Middle East peace and prosperity that is contingent upon Israel normalizing relations with other nations. We know this because that was the heart and soul of the Abraham Accords. That's what it was all about. And it almost happened. On October 6th, 2023, we were talking about the potential of normalization of relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. That would have been the ultimate victory. When Joe Biden in September of 2023 at the G20 meeting in India came out and talked about the India-Middle East Economic Corridor, Netanyahu got up and gave a speech where he said, this is the greatest moment in modern Israeli history. The greatest moment. Why? Because it took Israel out of being this cancerous body that's causing conflict all over and elevated it into a major, regional economic player that was driving the well-being of the region, that it was becoming insinuated with all the other players, so much so that it could never be excised out. It meant Israel was permanent. Greater Israel was permanent part of the Middle East. The greatest moment in modern Israeli history. And Donald Trump was the architect of that. Even though Biden was the president, Donald Trump started that. And in Donald Trump's mind, he has to get back to that. That's the framework of peace that he's talking about. But it requires Israel to be the centerpiece because he's incapable of envisioning a structure of peace that minimizes Israel. His job is to maximize Israel, which means he has to end this conflict that Israel's in terms that are favorable to Israel. And this is the mission impossible. How can you have peace where, especially where Israel spent 15 months getting its, head bashed in by Hamas? Yes, there was genocide. I'm not there. Yes, the Palestinians, but Hamas wasn't defeated. Hamas won. It's not me saying that. The Israeli generals say that. Hamas won. Hamas beat Israel. And so now you're going to say, well, forget that. Forget history. Hamas must go away. Now, there's ways to make Hamas.
I disagree that Israel tried to defeat Hamas, and now we know why. They just started killing. See, they want to kill 300,000 to 400,000, and you can't kill 300,000 to 400,000 Palestinians if you just wipe Hamas out all early in the fight. See, just imagine keeping a fighter in the fight. Think of a boxing match, and you carrying the man it got to go 12 rounds. They are carrying Hamas to keep Hamas in this fight. Hamas is brave warriors, but they can't kill out. They want to wipe out all the Palestinians, so they got to keep the fighters in the fight. They want Hamas to keep on taking more civilians and putting them in their ranks and files. Then they just kill more quicker. They got them trapped. They can't go nowhere. So to say they couldn't defeat Hamas, yeah, I said that in the beginning. No, now you got to look at it. They didn't try to defeat them. They didn't try to defeat Hezbollah. They had a phony peace treaty, rearmed, reorganized, regrouped, and just of yesterday, they started killing people. 1,000 people died yesterday. See, That is their goal. They want Hamas. See, if Hamas keeps this up, then they'll kill 1 million Palestinians. Hamas is brave, but America's not going to stop it. It's only 2-point-something million people in Palestine. They are trapped. And America already said, as long as Hamas is fighting, the inside Israel got the right to exist and all that bullshit. Man, come on, man. These people will kill every single last one of those people. They do not want to defeat fucking Hamas. If you stop calling yourself Hamas, you got weapons over there, they got to kill you too. That's a fact. That is what's on Israel's mind. And people don't understand that all that Hamas can't be defeated. Israel don't want to defeat them. They want to kill everybody.
Hamas go away. Hamas knows this. That's why Hamas was part of the 14 Palestinian factions that flew to Moscow, that flew to Beijing to talk about creating a political singularity that would take the name Hamas off of the marquee and put something else up there. But Hamas would be intermingled down here. So they would stop being the headliner, but be part of, the main body. We could have gone that route, but we didn't. Because, see, that changes things. That now that the simplistic Abrams Accord, Israel is the center of everything, that model doesn't apply. And Trump didn't have an alternative model. And so he got trapped into this. It's not that Netanyahu trapped him. Trump trapped himself into this model because he was incapable of conceiving a solution that had Hamas emerging victorious. And what's troubling about that conclusion, which I buy into because I just made it, is he was apparently engaged in negotiations with Hamas, which is a step that no other presidency has taken. And that's what I don't understand. On the one hand, he is capable of taking these risky moves. Again, whatever you want to say about Donald Trump,
he fake negotiations.
Sat down, he negotiated directly with the Taliban to get out of Afghanistan. Nobody else was doing that. He did it. He met with Kim Jong-un. Nobody else did that. He did it. This is a man who is capable of breaking the mold in terms of standard diplomatic practices and going out and taking risks. Why couldn't he continue the risk taking? That's what I don't understand. That's what I can't comprehend. And it gets to the psychology again of peace through strength. And I guess he was feeling vulnerable. Maybe in his mind, he was being asked to make too many concessions to peace, and he needed to, reestablish the concept of strength.
That's the
it's impossible to know. Is it possible that he can go out there and flex his muscles, then back off and say, "See, this is the potential of American military power"? The problem with it is that you're using this against the Houthi, who've been bombed by American military power by proxy or directly since 2014. They're not going to back down. I mean, we've started an existential fight with the Houthi, meaning in order for us to win, we have to destroy them. And again, I just want to remind people, Ansarallah and the Houthi, where does this notion come from? I'm not an expert on Islam. I don't pretend to be one, but my understanding is that the Houthi provided safety to, the Prophet Muhammad when he was transiting the area. They are the protectors of Islam. I mean, and this is part of their very essence. We're not playing with, simple hill folk here. We're playing with people who are actually very sophisticated, who can build sophisticated weapon systems, who have imbued into them a notion of Islamic purity, not fanaticism like the Wahhabists or, head chopping, but purity, meaning that they are driven to support those who need support. That's why they're supporting the Palestinians. Because they believe in this. They believe that it is their duty, their responsibility to do this. And we're going to bomb them into submission. We're going to bomb people who believe that by giving their life in defense of this pure mission they have, they will go to paradise. They believe this. Where are the advisors to Donald Trump? Where are the people who are supposed to be telling him, don't do this bad move, boss? Well, we know it's not going to be Pete Hegseth. He's the one who's out there, speaking about, I forget what he said, it's the equivalent of we're going to bomb you into submission.
We're talking about peace through strength.
Right. But he said, we're going to pummel you and do all, Marco Rubio, he has no understanding of the region of the Houthi. Tulsi Gabbard, God bless her. I have a lot of respect for her, but she's so focused on Islamic extremism that she somehow has been blinded, and now she is calling the Houthi Islamic extremists, equating them with Al Qaeda and ISIS when they're the furthest thing from Al Qaeda and ISIS. Donald Trump is not well served, and he's not a man who has the inherent capabilities of formulating these positions on his own. He wants peace. I still honestly believe that this is a man who wants peace, but he doesn't know how to get from where we are to peace because he keeps being dragged down the path of war by his own inner demons and by the advice of those around him.
Here is what Hexet said that you mentioned.
This campaign is about freedom of navigation and restoring deterrence. The minute the Houthis say, be very clear, this campaign is about freedom of navigation and restoring deterrence. The minute the Houthis say, we'll stop shooting at your ships, we'll stop shooting at your drones, this campaign will end. But until then, it will be unrelenting. We got the reports last night, Maria. The Houthi capital felt like an earthquake. Dozens and dozens of precision heavy munitions dropping precisely on the targets that we wanted to hit, sending a very clear message. And the message is clear to Iran as well. And the president said it in his truth. Your support of the Houthis needs to end immediately. We will hold you accountable as the sponsor of this proxy. And I echo his statement. We will not be nice about it. This is not the Biden administration. The message is clear. We will come after the Houthis until they stop shooting at our ships, and the Iranians better stay out of it.
When he's talking about the Biden administration, it seems to me that he doesn't know. I don't know if they have provided him with the information about the fight that the Biden administration had with Houthis. They have been bombing the Houthis, and it wasn't just the easy way. They did everything possible to fight them. But it seems that Pete Hegseth comes out and says, no, the way that we're dealing with Houthis is totally different. They haven't seen anything like this that we are doing to them. How do you think that he knows what has happened during the Biden administration?
I'm sure he's briefed on it, but this is a man who has an irrational belief in the supremacy of American firepower. Look, I've served in the American military in times of war, in times of peace. We are very capable. In some ways, we're the most capable military on the planet. There's no other force in the world that can project military power globally like the United States of America. No other military could do what we're doing in Yemen. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm saying that we're unique in that ability. And so sometimes with the capabilities comes, a cockiness that borders on irrational. But I'm also somebody that I was an intelligence officer who spent a lot of time doing targeting. And I am intimately familiar with Central Command, which is running this conflict, and the inadequacies of their intelligence staff. I know for a fact that the Central Command has a tendency to do a lot of speculation. They are victims of their own inherent prejudices and of intellectual modeling that they do that's based upon a lack of understanding. Look, this dates back to the Gulf War. I was heavily involved in the targeting of Iraqi Scud missiles, both in terms of their production capacity, their command and control, and their operational, activities that we tried to interdict their launches. I will tell you that, and this became evident when I became a weapons inspector in the United Nations afterwards, because I had an opportunity. It was a unique opportunity to participate in the active targeting of this target deck, and then go into Iraq afterwards and visit every place we attacked. and get the truth about it. We misidentified the vast majority of the targets we bombed. We claimed that we did more destruction on them than we did. And oftentimes we were hitting things that had nothing to do with what we thought they were doing. And when it came to mobile relocatable targets like the Scud missile, we blew up more Bedouin tents, more truck stops, more buses, more fuel tankers, more private vehicles than we did Scuds. We didn't kill a single Scud launcher in the entire war, despite diverting thousands of combat sorties dedicated to that task. But we did kill thousands of innocent Iraqis and hundreds of innocent Jordanian truck drivers. We slaughtered Bedouin families because we mistake a Bedouin tent filled with sheep because it was wintertime, so they bring the sheep at night, and you get a heat target that looks cylindrical, so you bomb it, saying, I got a Scud missile. No, you didn't. You killed a Bedouin. And when I say Bedouin family, I'm not talking about, a single nuclear element, father, mother, some kids. I'm talking about a collection of families that come together. So it's not just 5 people you killed 35 people in a tent together with their means of living. We did this over and over and over and over again. And we never learned the lesson. It was repeated in Alaska. It was repeated in Afghanistan. It's repeated every time we go to war. We don't understand the people that we're targeting. We don't understand how they operate, what they're doing. The Houthi have been, again, Pete Hegseth has to understand this. The American intelligence that's used to create the targeting wasn't invented yesterday. It's been actually applied on the Houthi target since 2014, when we started supporting the Saudi campaign against the Houthi. And we have been using American intelligence, the totality of it. Central Command's been behind this the whole time, collecting on the Houthi, turning that into targets that we turn over to the Saudis, who then bomb them using American airplanes and American bombs. So this campaign that Hegseth is running right now is not something that just happened yesterday. It's been going on since 2014, and we haven't beaten the Houthi yet. And now we're suddenly saying that if we just ratchet it up, how do you ratchet it up? Again, I've been there. I understand what happened. Find me more targets. What do you want? More targets? That just means I have to become more creative and looking at things I don't understand. And so now you start saying, well, gosh, what are we looking for? A truck park. Oh, here's a truck park. Here's a truck park. Here's a truck park. And we bombed those, but all we bombed was truck parks. They're not what we thought they are. They aren't the source of the mobile launchers. What are we looking for? Underground facilities. Well, look, there's a door into the side of a hill. Let's bomb that. And we just start bombing things we don't understand. We don't know what we're doing. We give them names. We get incomplete, cause effect. We get signals intelligence where they talk about, the Al Mamoun factory. But now we look where it is, but there's an Al Mamoun water distribution center, but we just see Al Mamoun. We say, there's the factory. Bam, we hit a water distribution center, kill a bunch of civilians. We didn't do anything. This is what's happening right now. Hegseth, he's shaking the Capitol. Congratulations, Pete. You drop enough bombs, you make the ground shake. If you think those people are scared, look what's happened in the streets today of that city, filled with millions of Yemenis, of Houthis or Ansarallah, saying, no, bring it on. We're here. We're willing to, they'll do this forever. You will never break them, ever, ever. What will happen, though, Pete, and I'm just predicting the future here, this is going to become a horribly expensive campaign. The Biden administration found that out, too. Right now, they're talking about diverting up to 3 carrier battle groups into the region. This costs a lot of money. Where's that money come from? We just did a continuing resolution. So there's no, additional funds. We're going to be eating into we're going to run into the same problem that the Biden administration ran into, which is we have depleted operational funds. We now have to cut into training. We have to cut into other things to fund this war that was not funded. We didn't predict this war. We weren't prepared for this war. This administration's too young to have built up a budgetary reserve for this. So we are literally, we've gone through the fat and we are now consuming the muscle of the American military. This war is making us weaker. We are expending munitions for which we don't have an industrial base geared up to replace. How long are we going to fire multi-million-dollar cruise missiles at targets we don't understand. We will run out of bombs before the Houthi ever quit. And then what? We're going to take this on to Iran? I mean, we're going to find out the hard way that Iran isn't the weak nation. I mean, here's the other problem that we have. There are people telling, Trump, Iran's a house of cards. Blow hard and they go down. Now, normally I would say, well, how stupid can you be? Except we just had Syria go down. And who amongst us predicted that? No one. No one. There's not a single person in the world that said Syria down the cards. And down it went. So now, I haven't been to Iran in a while. I don't know the true state of affairs. I know that there's dissension between the president and the supreme leader, that there's tension there, and between him and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Command, there's some tension there. I know there's extreme economic difficulties in Iran, but I also know that in 2023, Iran was stress tested, that the CIA, MI6, and others brought all their proxies up together in the aftermath of the tragic death of that Kurdish girl at the hands of the police. And they attempted a regime change operation. I spoke to President Raisi about it in September 2023. He said it was one of the greatest threats to the existence of Iran since the Iran-Iraq war. He said it was a big problem, but Iran beat it. The Iranian people rallied around. That was 2023. This is 2025. A lot can change since then. I mean, hell, Syria was stress tested all the way up until 2020 and found that they were solid. They could push back against ISIS and Al Qaeda, Al Nusra, and all that. But a few years later, bam, down they go. So, is it irrational for Donald Trump to be told if we just pressure Iran, they will collapse? I mean, I disagree with, but I don't have perfect intelligence on that. And again, somebody can say, look what happened to Syria. Just pressure them the right way and they will collapse. So maybe that's what's driving him right now. Maybe what Donald Trump is trying to do is take a shortcut, basically saying it was too complicated to negotiate with Hamas and all this. We're going to take down Hamas, collapse Iran, and then peace will break out all over. I don't know, because he hasn't done a good job of articulating what this strategy is. And his spokespeople, I mean, other than Pete Hegseth talking about, shaking, the Houthi into submission through bombs, which is just stupid. He should know better. Where are the intelligence analysts? I mean, I'm not unique. There are people in there that they're smart. There's people that know how to put two and two together to connect the dots. Why aren't they standing up saying, this ain't going to work? Well, that means that the Trump administration has done what past administrations have done. Remove the professionals and bring in the ideologues, the yes men or yes women, people who are incapable of telling the president the truth and instead tell the president what he wants to hear, which is, if we just do this, this will happen. I don't know. This is very frustrating because I had hoped we were on a path towards peace. And right now we don't seem to be on a path towards peace.
I can say that Iran doesn't have anything to do with Syria. It's on much more complicated. They have their differences,
I agree with
that doesn't make any sort of external policy for Iran. They know what they're looking after. They're looking for, and the difference is the policy, that the way that they're gonna negotiate is not something substantial, Scott. It's not something that would collapse the Iranian government.
I know that. I'm saying that the Trump administration, again, first of all, Nima, understand this. I'm speculating because the Trump administration hasn't put out a white paper that says this is our strategy, this is how we're doing it. I mean, we can criticize the Biden administration all we want, and I did. I made a career out of criticizing them, but at least they gave us a foundation of intellectual thought that said this is our policy. I could look at it and go, and then spend my life picking it apart. Sniping, long-range sniping. But Trump hasn't even given us that. We don't have anything. We are basing ourselves upon social media posts that are all over the map. Trying to follow a Trump press conference is an exercise in futility if you're looking for intellectual consistency. I oftentimes just I don't like watching them because it just angers me. I mean, I get angry when I watch Trump speak because it's just irrational blustering. But you have to listen to his words because we're in the, back in the old days in Soviet times. I mean, honest to God, we had all the intelligence capabilities in the world, but people actually waited for Victory Day or the revolution celebrations in November to look at the reviewing stand and go, okay, where's Brezhnev? Okay, who's next to Brezhnev? Ooh, he moved one space over. What does that mean? What does that mean if this guy's there? This guy's not there. What does that mean? And they were doing this. This is criminology. I mean, Kremlinology. Literally, the exact opposite of what an intelligence professional should be doing, which is reading, the statements and looking at how the statements, interact with actual policy and things. Instead, we're looking at photographs, seeing where people are and their body language and all that, trying to discern, because we had no clue. And so that's what happens with Trump. You have to listen to these asinine, inane statements he makes because it's the only clue you have. You have to listen to it and say, I'm hoping I hear something. Oh, and then you're hoping upon hope that is, an indication of real intent, that all the other crap that he said is just nonsense and bluster, and we're just going for this. It's very frustrating being a Trump analyst. It's an exercise in futility and frustration.
When it comes to the way that they see the conflict with Houthis, here is what Rubio said, Scott. It doesn't seem that they have a clear message, clear sort of message to Houthis, or a clear image of what would be the future of this conflict. Here is what Rubio said.
Have these people controlling which ships can go through and which ones cannot. And so your question is, how long will this go on? It will go on until they no longer have the capability to do that.
So how they can measure that? How is that possible?
It can't. Marco Rubio is an idiot. I mean, I hate
the same sort of policy that we've been witnessing with Russia. They say we'd sanction Russia, fighting Russia in Ukraine, just Russia would collapse from within.
Except I think this administration understands the difference is Russia has proven through 3 years of sustained combat that it is not a power to be trifled with. And there are consequences for getting peace wrong with Russia, which is why I think right now they're speaking. President Putin and Trump are speaking as we're recording this. So I don't think the phone call is Trump. All right, Vladimir, this is the way it's going to be. You're going to do this, you're going to do that, or else we're going to do this. We're going to shut your economy down. I don't think that's the way the conversation's going at all. I think it's hey, Mr. President, we're concerned about this. Our people have talked, and we've mentioned the following. These are some things that we'd like you to consider. And Putin will say, thank you very much for saying this. On this one, we think there's some way we can work. This one is more difficult. We're going to have to do some more massaging on this. And then Trump isn't going to go, bull, no, you will do it our way, or we will bomb you and make your capital shake. It doesn't work that way with Russia. Because Russia's powerful, they have nuclear weapons, and they've proven over 3 years that they can beat NATO in a stand-up fight, which includes the United States conventionally. So but the Houthi, I mean, on the one hand, again, people should be advising Pete, hey, Pete, we already tried the 3-carrier thing. Didn't work. But what happens is they start hitting us with missiles, and we have to pull outside of their range. And then the next thing you know, we've extended our time on station until we deplete all the ammunition. And then we have to withdraw, and now we're bankrupt. We don't have follow-on carrier. Pete, this isn't a good idea. They don't quit. They don't quit at all. But no, we're arrogant. We think we can bomb them into submission. And Rubio's statement is, I will make the following prediction, that the carrier battle groups will withdraw from station before the Houthi quit, because the Houthi will never quit. and the carrier battle groups will run out of ammunition. That's a guaranteed outcome here. And what we're going to kill now, what are we going to do? Go into collective punishment? Because at some point in time, we're going to get frustrated because we're going to be bombing things and it's not stopping the Houthi from launching their missiles against ships. And so we get frustrated. So now what? We embrace the Israeli tactic of collective punishment. We start bombing, civilian areas. And then the death toll goes up, and now we're guilty of committing genocide. What are we going to do? Put a counter blockade on them and prevent humanitarian goods from coming in so that we have millions of starving Yemeni children like we have had in the past? Understand that didn't cause the Houthi to stop fighting before, by the way. I just want to let everybody know that we have already done the starve the children in order to make them submit a game, and it didn't work. It's just going to blow back on us. It's going to make us look bad, and it's going to make us look weak, ultimately. This is just the opposite of peace through strength. This is weakness by pretending to be strong when you're not.
Do you think if the situation escalates between the United States and Yemen, that is the Trump administration able to force the Arab states into the conflict with Yemen?
No, they've already done it. I mean, again, what are we asking? We're asking Saudi Arabia to commit forces in. They've done that and they got beat by the Houthi. It's been there, done that. They got the T-shirt. United Arab Emirates, you want to get them to come back in? No, they've done that. They got beat. And remember what happened. The Houthi launched drones that took out oil, threatened critical strategic infrastructure. And they brought in the totality of their air power backed by American intelligence, and they couldn't stop it. Couldn't stop it. It's a big country. Look at it. It's big. It's not easy to fly aircraft over that country and get that. During the Gulf War in Western Iraq, we used to have combat sorties, F-15Es, Strike Eagles, flying at night and A-10s flying at day. But night was the most popular time for the Iraqis to launch. And we'd have the combat air patrols over there, and we'd have all the intelligence. So when the Iraqis would fire a missile, sometimes we were only 5 or 6 minutes away. But by the time we came in to the target, they were gone. They were gone. There was nothing to bomb. And so we futilely look around and we find trucks moving down the highway that aren't missile related, but they're fuel tankers. We say, oh, well, they're long and they're cylindrical, and we're pissed, so bomb them. So we blow up the trucks. We didn't stop the missiles. We didn't kill a single Iraqi Scud launcher in the entire war. Targeting is difficult, especially over a tough thing. We try to put loitering drones over the MQ-9s, and the Houthi are shooting them down. I mean, I forget, they've shot down a whole bunch of them. These are expensive things. It adds up to a lot of money. But they basically shot down over a squadron's worth of MQ-9 Reaper drones. Over a squadron. We've lost a squadron of Reaper drones over Yemen in this fight. and so I don't know what Hegseth, is he going to reinvent, the laws of war? Suddenly because Pete Hegseth comes in and he has his little infantry thing and I'm a war fighter and I run with the guys. And because I run with the guys, we're going to do things more efficiently. Well, there's been professional military people out there trying to accomplish this mission before you were Secretary of Defense, Pete. And they can't do it because it's impossible. You don't have enough aircraft. We diverted in the Gulf War over 2,500 sorties into Western Iraq. 2,500. And you got a carrier battle group with a wing, one wing, dozens of aircraft, dozens, not thousands, dozens, not hundreds, dozens. And you're going to cover the expanse of Yemen with that? Are you high? And the answer is he must be, because this isn't going to work. It can't work. It's a military impossibility. We don't have the resources to begin to do this. We would have to literally bring in almost the totality of America's existing strike capacity and base it on land bases around Yemen and flood the zone 24/7, which we did in Western Iraq during the Gulf War, and we still didn't accomplish the mission. So, no, we can't do this. It's impossible to do this. Satellites are good, but at the end of the day, it's what's in the analyst's head. we used to have, there was a time when we had analysts who spent their entire career looking at a target, their entire career. And God, they knew everything. I mean, if a mouse dug a hole in the field next to it, they would say, that mouse doesn't normally dig a hole this time of year, so there's something doing that. So let's look at what caused the vibrations. You know, I mean, I'm being ridiculous here, but I'm just saying that that's the intimacy they had with the target. Then what happened is the Cold War ended, and we started this whole thing where we said, well, we can't, it's not cost efficient to hire somebody and have them sit in the same desk for 30 years. I mean, that's just not good. We need to have these people go out there and get more. So instead of being an absolute expert on your subject, we became, you know, these people with diversity. And I saw this when I was doing the Iraq thing. The CIA would bring in their photo interpreter teams. And, you know, initially we had people that actually had studied the target. And you go, okay, these guys know. But then they retired or pushed aside. They brought in these new people who had been doing it for 6 months. You don't know anything about a target in 6 months. And they were briefing. They had no clue what they were briefing. They couldn't even pronounce the name right. They had no clue of the history of the target. And then by the time they became familiar through repetition, they were rotated out and a new group were rotated in. And this is what happens in CENTCOM. You don't have any experts in CENTCOM. You have specialists who get rotated in. They take control of a target thing. But the other thing is, there's nobody that has the big picture anymore. They're all looking at tiny little fractions, but they're not allowed to make their conclusions. They have to drive it up because intelligence now is just so carefully managed. They have layers of management overboard. I used to be, as a junior captain, God. Why? Because I was the guy. Junior captain. I was given the job of doing it. And I would do it. And I was responsible for briefing the big guy. There might be, you know, 1 or 2 layers of management, but they didn't get in the way too much. They were just like, well, what do you got here? Let's facilitate in here. But today the analyst has to give it to his, you know, initial management who, you know, looks at it, proofreads it. The other thing is they farm it out. It used to be you'd work right there at Central Command. And they come down and you'd have to go and talk to the boss, and the boss would have to look in your eyes and say, you know, well, how do you know this? And if he sees fear, he's like uncertainty, whatever. Nope. Now they break it up into packages and they send it out here, there, and everywhere. And we saw that when we had that idiot airman up in Massachusetts leak documents. Why was a guy in Massachusetts, a reservist, having access to sensitive, you know, intelligence documentation about a conflict in Russia? Because the way we've decentralized this is that was his task. Given it, he doesn't know anything. It's a cut and paste job. There's no analysis happening here. It's cut and paste. He's putting together, assembling into a product that gets set up, and the product is meaningless. Go look at those documents. The stuff that's in there is wrong, most of it, but it's got top secret information and all this stuff. There's no genuine analysis there. There's no effort to sit there and actually take the stuff, eat it, digest it, and to regurgitate it as some sort of intelligence that's derived and thought out, etc. They don't allow people to do that anymore. It's literally just a cut and paste job area. There's no experts on anything. I challenge CENTCOM to bring your Houthi expert here and have a discussion. They won't. But the person isn't an expert. How long have you been doing the job? Well, I was rotated in last September. It's not his fault or her fault. You know, they have a career and they get rotated here, there, and everywhere. But there used to be a time when you had genuine experts who knew the language, knew the culture, had done tours over there. But the problem is they went native. You can't have an analyst going native. You can't have an analyst saying, yeah, well, when I was in Sana'a, well, you were in Sana'a? Yeah. Why would you want to be there? You met a Houthi? Yeah, man. Did they corrupt you? Did they take control of you? Oh, we have to replace this guy and bring in somebody who's never been there, never met them, doesn't speak the language, because then we'll know that his analysis is pure. Instead of having somebody who's there and knows the people. We don't do that anymore. It takes too much time. Nobody has the patience. And to be honest, nobody wants that guy or gal. Why? Because the way our politicians work today is they want the intelligence community to reinforce conclusions they've already made. They don't want to sit there and have somebody tell, especially somebody like Donald Trump. You think Donald Trump wants to have somebody tell him what's going on? No, Donald Trump sits there, you know, he's the best at everything. Best at everything. Well, you know, I have read, I am the greatest expert on the Houthi in America today. And so I am going to dictate outcomes, and I don't want anybody coming to me and telling me I'm wrong. You can't even get into his office to tell him he's wrong. And the first time you do that is the last time you're in his office. That's not the way this works. Bring on Ray McGovern. He used to brief the president and the vice president. Ask him, was it his job to say, Mr. President, how do I make you happy today? Or was his job to say, Mr. President, this is the real state of affairs in the world today that you got to deal with as commander in chief. These are problems, and that's what you need. But we don't do that anymore. I was hoping that Tulsi would change that. And to be fair, we're still so young into this. I don't even know if they've decided how they're going to brief the president and what format they're going to brief him and who's going to do the briefing yet. But the point is, somebody has to get next to him and tell him he's wrong. And just say, Mr. President, you're wrong. This is the truth. This is how it works. Somebody did that with Russia because we saw him break from the Keith Kellogg pattern. And he's taken on a new. So somebody got to him. Maybe it was Steve Witkoff after meeting with Putin. I think it happened before that. I think something happened that triggered him sending Steve Witkoff instead of Kellogg. But somebody got to him about Russia and said, you're wrong. Because you saw a dramatic departure from the way he was dealing with Russia and Ukraine to what he's doing now. Somebody needs to do that about the Houthi, somebody and Iran. Get to him and say, this ain't the way, this isn't going to work. This is a disaster. But now we're committed to the fight. That's the problem. Peace through strength. Well, God, now that you're committed to the fight, anything less than total victory, especially the way that Rubio and Hegseth have articulated it, is a sign of weakness. And you can't have peace through weakness. So we're in trouble. We're in a lot of trouble right now.
And when you talk about someone in the United States, or can be Xi or Putin talking to Trump in terms of the Iranian nuclear program, because we know that there was a meeting among the three leaders, the president of Iran, and a meeting between Russia, China, and Iran.
Well, see, that's what gave me the faith that Trump was taking what I call the indirect approach, recognizing the political, because if somebody came to him and told him the reality, which is, this is my personal belief, or what I believe the reality of is in Iran today. They desperately want good relations with the West, from the supreme leader on down. But politically, they've been betrayed by the West too many times, and the hardliners who have come to into dominance, they don't trust the West anymore. They don't trust the West at all. And so it's impossible for those who want better relations with the West to seek better relations with the West through direct interaction with the West. That's what the president wants to do, but he's not going to be allowed to do it. China and Russia have built trust within Iran. And again, this is reading tea leaves because I'm not familiar with the negotiating record between Russia and Iran on the strategic agreement that they've signed, but I do know that I believe there's clauses in there that talk about Russia providing nuclear power plants for Iran. This is big because that means that Iran is departing from its past posture that says we will build our own nuclear power plants and we will provide the fuel for these. Therefore, we need the entirety of the fuel cycle under our control. For Russia to come in and say, no, we're going to build these nuclear power plants and we're going to provide the fuel for these plants, it takes away the argument that Iran must have this for their national survival and national security. And I think that was done on purpose. The Iranians aren't stupid. They're very smart. And so to allow that to be in there and to embrace it and to sign it, it's a signal from the Iranians saying that we are creating an off-ramp from the position that we currently hold. And I believe that China is also involved in negotiating for the potential of an off-ramp. I was hopeful that Trump was briefed on this because he had conversations with Putin and that he would say, okay, then what I need to do is shut down the potential of direct negotiations between the West and Iran. I need to breathe legitimacy into the alternative, because as long as you're pretending that there's a venue, a potential venue between West Iranian negotiations, that de-emphasizes the Russian off-ramp, it's not going to get the attention it needs. It's always going to be on the back burner or not even out of the refrigerator. What you need to do is shut down the potential of direct negotiations, and therefore the United States will turn to Russia. And before that was insane, but hell, now we got the United States and Russia working together in the Security Council to pass resolutions about Syria, to shut down anti-Russian resolutions that used to pass with American support all the time. We're in a new age, and if they continue diplomatic improvements, we're seeing the potential where the United States would be willing to hand off to Russia the responsibility for taking the lead, at least initially, on getting the Iranian nuclear program restructured in a way that doesn't make it conducive for escalation into a military program. Because that's all we want. That's what Trump says he wants. He's not after regime change anymore. He wants to get rid of that and get Iran back on the track of lifting sanctions and being part of the normal world. I take him at face value. So there is this potential of Russia and China helping the United States out. And as you said, Iran sat down with those leaders. I think that this was the direction that that we were heading. I don't know how. Right now, we need smart people to give the United States an off-ramp. This is what we need. And to be honest, the way this thing is cured is we get Israel to stop bombing Gaza and to resume the ceasefire and to send humanitarian goods back in. That cures. It doesn't cure the whole thing, but it stops the trigger for the Houthi. And then once you can get the Houthi to back off, then you can move in and try and create a framework that doesn't allow for hair trigger responses like this. And then once Iran has better relations and stuff, we could gradually simmer down tensions in the Middle East so that we don't have the ever-present threat of Houthi intervention or Israeli intervention. But the first thing that has to happen, the only way this gets solved, it's not going to be solved through military strength. The only way this gets solved is the way it was solved to begin with: a ceasefire, humanitarian goods, Israel standing down. Is the Trump administration capable of doing that? I don't know. I'm losing hope every day that they are, but that's the only way we get out of this.
As you mentioned today, Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump talked to each other, and it seems that it took an hour to talk about, I don't know, whatever is going on in Ukraine. But Donald Trump, before yesterday, he was talking about he's going to bring up the case of nuclear power plant. What does he want to do with that? Because that's under the control of Russians. I don't see that Russia would give up on that.
I mean, first of all, we have to assume that this isn't happening in a vacuum, meaning that the first time Vladimir Putin hears about this is in this conversation. So we have to assume that it has been part of past conversations and that the United States and Russia have exchanged ideas and concepts on this. I mean, first of all, I hate to say things because I know that the conversation ended and Trump was saying he was going to provide an immediate readout. So I'd really love to see that readout before I commit to a conversation that I have no idea what happened. But
I don't see that coming, by the way, Scott. It doesn't seem that would happen, but let's assume that.
But we know that the Ukrainians, first of all, the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant was an integral part of Ukraine's power generation infrastructure. And in any post-conflict, world, Ukraine would want to have that energy generation capability brought back under its auspices. So there could be a negotiation that allows for some sort of joint operation or let the Ukrainians operate it as part of a joint commission that sees the power not only go to Ukraine, but also be shared with the other regions that it used to be plugged into, some sort of normalization of this where the Ukrainians save face, a face-saving gesture, a nod towards sovereignty. I think that I don't know if the Russians will yield territory that they're on. Meaning, I don't think the United States is going to be successful in telling the Russians you have to give up a territory. I do think the United States is going to make a play. I don't know how successful they'll be as the territory that Russia has never occupied and or that doesn't occupy now and is unlikely to occupy anytime soon. That this be called Ukraine. For instance, the right bank of Kherson. Now, every Russian watching this is going to start throwing darts at my photograph on a wall and calling me bad names. I'm not the one making the connection. I'm just saying that I think that's part of the argument that the Trump administration is going to make. And the question is, is Russia willing to go back to, is Putin willing to go back to the Duma and have the Duma debate, in order to bring it into this war that Russia will yield the right bank of Kherson and yield. I don't think Russia can yield any part of the Donbass. The Donbass and Crimea are Russia forever. But we know that Kherson and Zaporizhia weren't intended. They were going to be returned as part of the Istanbul communique. And it's only because of the referendum. But the referendum, the results should be respected to the extent that what Russia controls is what Russia owns. But to bring a peace to this, the idea that Ukraine now is to give up territory that it's successfully held onto through force of arms, I don't know if that's an area where Russia will be willing to compromise or not. I think it's an area that the United States is going to be pushing Russia to compromise. And again, it depends what the United States puts on the table to compensate. If you told the Russians that by buying into this, by treaty, we will get international recognition of Crimea, the Donbass, and these territories, and there will be no chance of anybody saying that it's just temporary, because that's one of the things that Russia is concerned about, is that a ceasefire that says, yes, Russia gets to hold these territories, but it's temporary, only creates the conditions for war down the road. Russia wants so if you're willing to trade international recognition of these territories as Russia forever, but Russia has to let Ukraine keep the territories that it has successfully defended, is that a compromise that Russia is willing to make in those exchanges? And then, to add to that would be, if you're going to ask the Ukrainians to shrink the size of their military, you have to reward their military for the defense that it has conducted. You can't ask the military to retreat and be shrunk. I mean, that is the humiliation stacked upon humiliation. I'm not saying that, from a Russian perspective, the Ukrainians don't deserve to be humiliated, but from a peace perspective, you don't build from that. So maybe the idea is that if you're going to put pressure on the Ukrainians to reduce their military, that you acknowledge that their military actually defended Ukraine successfully in areas in Kherson, in Zaporizhia, and you give them that credit, so that when the military is reduced, it's done as a matter of honor, that they can say, we successfully defended Ukraine. We have some honor attached to this what's happening to us right now. Denazification is going to be an issue. How do you get to the elections, and who's going to be qualified to be in the elections? And how does Russia have guarantees that the next president will in fact work with the Duma to create constitutional amendments or changes in the constitution, maybe a new constitution that gives the Russian population of Ukraine the rights that the Russians have demanded they have, the right to their language, religion, their culture, not to be oppressed? And how do you outlaw the ideology of Bandera, this Ukrainian nationalism that has taken Ukraine down the path of destruction? How do we get there? I know Russia has identified people that it would like to bring in, but again, that's a big ask on the part of Ukraine and Europe if you're not giving Ukraine anything in return. Odessa, how do you deal with Odessa? I mean, Odessa cannot stay with Ukraine if the British get to build a military base there. So there has to be demilitarization, no NATO presence. I'd say there has to be maybe a joint commission. The Russians have to get into Odessa and be part of that, at least for a little while, to make sure that it has been demilitarized. Buffers in Sumy, and along the line of contact, you have to physically separate the Ukrainian military from that. Who's going to monitor that buffer? What troops are going to go in? It's not going to be the British and the French or anybody from Europe. So who's going to come in, and then what are the mechanisms of reporting, and how do you all nail that down? There's a lot out there that's going to require compromises on both sides. But ultimately, Russia has to get its strategic objectives: no Ukraine and NATO, demilitarization, denazification, and permanent recognition of Russian borders. I think that most of these issues had been talked about. That's my guess, is that most of these issues had been talked about, and that this 1 hour conversation was to nail down the details and identify any potential outstanding issues so that they can be focused upon for rapid resolution. I think Russia is serious about bringing this conflict to an end, but it has to be done in a way that, gives Russia what it wanted when this conflict started. The key question is, what is Ukraine going to get out of this? I don't think Ukraine gets to keep a Zelensky-type presidency or things like that. But you have to be careful how you deal with Ukraine, because if it's done too harshly, too one-sided, you're never going to get Europe to buy into this. This has to be done in a way that Europe saves face, meaning, if it weren't for our intervention, Russia would have had all of Ukraine. But because we stood strong against Russia, the peace settlement, we've retained, aspects of Ukrainian sovereignty, this, that, and the other thing. Who knows? Maybe Russia has to go back to its pre-war stance that Ukraine, could join the European Union at some point. But now the European Union stopping being a political economic structure and starting to become militarized. Well, you can't replace NATO with the European Union and speak. So this is a complicated problem. And like I said, before I go too much further, I really want to know what the two guys talked about, so that there's some reality to my assessment, as opposed to me just pulling things out of thin air.
Here is what White House said. They said that the conversation between Trump and Putin has concluded, and it lasted nearly 2.5 hours.
It's a big conversation.
Yeah, big conversation. It is many issues. Do you think that we're going to see the same sort of talk between the United States and Europeans, or at this stage they're not considering that?
This is a problem between the United States and Russia right now. We have to, before we go to the Europeans, we have to have a finished deal, or something close to a finished deal. I'm encouraged by 2.5 hours. I am. When you originally said an hour, I was like, that's not enough time. That's not enough time. But 2.5 hours is enough time. It means that they were working through details. And when you have leaders at that level working through details, they don't want to walk away with a no. They want to walk away with a yes, or we're going to get back to this one. We just have to work things out. So I'm encouraged by the length of the conversation. Remember, the length of the first conversation was 90 minutes, hour and a half. This conversation went on for an additional hour. That means that details, and they were trying. If this was a short conversation, that means that, because there's no way this was a short conversation and good. A short conversation meant that they couldn't find any common ground and the conversation ended. 2.5 hours mean that they were working together over this. That's a long conversation. And, it doesn't guarantee a successful outcome, but it at least shows that both sides were trying to achieve something good. And I don't know. I mean, you see the statement. Is it a positive statement? Is it a statement saying that, there were positive results?
It didn't mention.
All right, we are live again. Alexander, long time no see.
Absolutely, two lives in the space of a day. But there we go. Events. There's a famous prime minister in Britain, Macmillan, who was asked, "What do you most fear?" He said, "Events, dear boy, events." There we go, events.
Yep, absolutely. Let's see. Are we live? Is everything all right? Just 1 second, Alexander, because I set this up so quickly.
Yeah.
I'm not. Yeah, I think we're live. Yeah. Peter, are we live? Yeah. Yeah. All right.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Excellent.
Alexander, we had the phone call
between
Trump and Putin. It ended about, I want to say about an hour ago, let's say, give or take.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we have the readout from the Kremlin, which is the one that I think matters. This is the readout from the Kremlin, right?
Yeah.
And you sent me the readout. So before we went live, you sent me the readout. So what is going on?
Well, the first thing to say is that this readout was published within minutes of the end of the call, which tells me that some parts of it were written even probably before the call took place, and perhaps during the time when the call was happening. So the Kremlin was very, very keen to get its own account of the call out as quickly as possible. And it's not surprising. There's been so much misrepresentation and distortion of things that, it's understandable that they would want to go live on this. So first things first, Putin has given away nothing. I think that is an important thing. There's a lot of speculation on some parts of the internet that Putin was going to agree to the ceasefire, the unconditional ceasefire, that he was going to accept the European peacekeepers, all of those things, that he was going to walk all of that back. He did nothing of the sort. He made it absolutely clear that the things that he said in his press conference last week remain absolutely in place. He wants military aid to Ukraine to stop. He wants intelligence sharing with Ukraine to stop. He is not going to shift from that position one bit. And I think we can take that as read. He has agreed to Trump's proposal for a cessation of attacks on the Ukrainian energy system. But this looks like a concession, a big concession, but in fact it isn't. And I'll explain why. Firstly, it is only for 30 days. Now, if you follow Russian missile strikes with the care and attention that Alex and I do, you will know that they usually happen over periods of 30 days. You have one big strike, and 30 days later, when presumably they've manufactured more missiles and have kept an eye on what's going on in Ukraine, that's when they launch the missiles again. So actually, it doesn't make any difference. And notice it's a ceasefire, so it's presumably a bilateral ceasefire. If the Ukrainians breach it by launching drone attacks on the Russian energy system, as they're very, very likely to do, it's entirely possible that the Russians will say that the ceasefire is breached and they can go back and start launching missile strikes again. So this isn't actually a concession. I want to say that to the people who are watching this program. Obviously, and it's entirely understandable why, Trump will treat it as one and will say that it is one. And one can understand why. And one should not criticize him for doing that, because he has to come back and show to people that he's getting things from Putin. But we, the community, know a bit better. The other thing is about this no interference in shipping in the Black Sea. There's never been any real interference in commercial shipping in the Black Sea, not at any point in the war. This is a misunderstood issue. Much talk at various times about a Russian blockade, naval blockade of Odessa. We had something that sort of resembled that in the first weeks of the war. But in practice, the Russians have never interfered with commercial shipping from Odessa. They know perfectly well that if they did, it would be extremely badly received by many of their friends in the global south who continue to import grain and foodstuffs from Ukraine. So it's important to say this. Putin conceded nothing. He made his point that there has to be a full resolution. It must address the root causes of the conflict. He impressed on Trump that he is keen to get a negotiated solution. And just as I said, by the way, in a video that I've done earlier today, which you'll be seeing on my channel in a very short
later.
time.
Yeah.
Exactly. I said that they would set up an expert meeting to talk about how possible ceasefire might be worked out. And that's exactly what's happened. You'll find the reference to the expert meeting in this readout. I also, by the way, said that what Trump was talking about power stations and ports was probably a tax on the energy system and on shipping in the Black Sea. I said that also in my program. And nobody's called me, by the way. It's just that, we follow the news. Alex and I follow this very, very closely. So we could see how this was coming, but that's what we do. Alex said in our latest live, we do 25 programs a week or something like this. Well, doing 25 programs a week means that we have our finger on the events and we can see the way things are going. The most important single paragraph in the readout, by far the most important, is one which says, if I can just get hold of it, it says the following. The leaders confirmed their intention to continue efforts to achieve a Ukrainian settlement in a bilateral mode, including taking into account the above-mentioned proposals of the US president. For this purpose, Russian and American expert groups are being created in a bilateral mode. In other words, from this moment on, the negotiations are between Russia and the United States directly. Ukraine is not involved, nor are the Europeans. The Americans and the Russians are going to negotiate the end of the conflict with each other.
That's huge.
The Ukrainians, exactly, it's huge. The Ukrainians will be floating around. They will have that there, but they will have their own negotiating team. But ultimately, be the Americans and the Russians who will decide the settlement, and the Ukrainians will be presented with the terms. Now, saying that makes it sound rather more simple than it really is. The Ukrainians will probably protest the terms. They will say they won't accept them. They'll go to their European friends. That's all in the future. But Trump and Putin have agreed in this conversation that it'll be the United States and Russia that will decide how to settle the conflict with each other.
Yeah, so the Zelensky regime will go to the Europeans. The Europeans will try to sabotage these agreements that have been made, this understanding that has been made during this phone conversation. The forces in London, in DC, in Paris, the neocons, they're going to try to sabotage all of this.
Yes.
What are your thoughts about that?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, I should say that when the Russians and the Americans are setting up expert groups, it leaves no space for Starmer's plan to insert European peacekeepers or anything of that kind. But we're going to have media campaigns. We're going to have political leaders complaining about this. We're going to have Zelensky complaining about this. There is going to be a massive political campaign to try to block this. I don't think it's going to work in the end, because as we've seen, the United States ultimately has enormous leverage over Ukraine, and the United States wants a peace agreement. It wants a peace agreement with Russia. It wants to move on to improve relations with Russia. Other parts of the readout, which I'm not going to spend time on today, are about improving relations between Russia and the United States. That is a priority for the Trump administration. I don't think they're going to let these objections from the neocons and the Democrats, whose popularity in the United States is continuing to fall. I think that's an important thing to bear in mind. Despite all of the problems we've been hearing about in the economy, the American people continue to turn away from them. I don't think all the objections from the Europeans, the Democrats, the neocons, all of these discredited people, these terrible people who got us into this crisis, are going to derail the Trump administration from what it wants to do. which is to end the war and to re-establish good relations with Russia, or at least, if not good relations with Russia, at least a rapprochement with Russia, so that things can go back to the way they were before Obama basically wrecked everything during the period when he was president.
Normal relations.
Normal relations.
Which has been Russia's goal from the beginning of these negotiations.
Absolutely.
Even beyond Ukraine, their goal has always been the normalization of relations between the US and Russia.
Exactly. And to repeat again, given that this is the purpose, the overriding objective of the US administration, what we're going to end up with is something that is not that far from Istanbul Plus, just to say.
Yeah. So beware of the sabotage, beware of false flags.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of stuff is going to be
absolutely.
Is going to be tried. Yeah, a lot of stuff is going to be tried.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of concern about I'm looking in the chat right now about the energy infrastructure agreement from Grugash 1001. Putin has agreed to stop attacking energy infrastructure for 30 days after Zelensky's attack on Belgorod. Why would he do that? Probably,
well, I
may
said,
want to explain it again. Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly
I mean, he's giving something to Trump. He's giving to Trump something that Trump can go back and tell his people, look, I'm actually making progress with Putin. But in fact, it's a concession that isn't really a concession at all. Because if you follow Russian missile attacks in Ukraine, they don't happen every day. They happen usually, there's one big missile attack every month. We've just had one a few days ago, in fact. So it's likely that the next big missile strike is anyway only scheduled to happen in 30 days. So it's not a big concession. In fact, in practice, in reality, it is not a concession at all.
Yeah. There's something about a hockey match as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Which is, a good sign. It's a sign that, they're starting to move on sports and things of that kind. The Russians are crazy about hockey. Of course, they mean ice hockey. Just to make that clear to British viewers.
Well, they also, the United States has also pulled out of the investigative committees as well. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Absolutely.
That were set up by Biden and Harris was setting all these committees up to investigate Russia and to investigate Putin as well.
Absolutely. And Trump basically pulled the plug on all of that. He said, this is not taking us anywhere. This is absurd. I mean, he didn't say that, but anyway, they pulled the plug on that. So that was a gesture, a conciliatory gesture to the Russians. And by the way, it's not been widely reported, but the Russians reciprocated in the few over the last couple of hours before this conversation happened. The Russians allowed some American shareholders of shares in Russian companies to actually trade in those shares again and to sell them. So those shares have been frozen, and the Russians allowed them to do that. So these are the sort of friendly moves that each side makes to the other when a process of rapprochement starts.
Let's see, Alexander from Commando Crossfire, double live day. What a treat. Great work, guys. Thank you for that. Graugush 1001, thank you for that. Super chat. Commander Crossfire says, beware of those that come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. The Russians should keep in mind the U.S. was and is behind it all. Well, we discussed this in a video.
Yeah,
we discussed this in a video that we recorded the other day, that it's not an easy pitch from Putin to the Russians, the rapprochement with the United States. I mean, you discussed this. Yeah.
Absolutely. But I mean, just to repeat again, Putin has given away nothing over the course of this call. He's told Trump, absolutely, you want peace? I want peace. You want peace in Ukraine? I want peace in Ukraine. But I'm going to get that peace
got everything
on my terms. That's what he's telling Trump. He's not given an inch.
Trump agreed.
He says he wants the root causes of the conflict resolved. He's went to great lengths about how the Zelensky regime simply cannot be trusted, something about which, by the way, Trump himself undoubtedly agrees. So, I mean, but it's there in the Russian.
This humiliation is the reason he attacking Yemen, and they're going to attack Iran in the end, because they have been humiliated in Ukraine and they can't let that stand. So they're going to go for the weakest link in the chain. That is Iran.
Readout. And he's not agreeing to a unconditional 30-day ceasefire. I never thought he would. I mean, they're going to be expert panels, and this will probably take a long time to work out, maybe several weeks. And in the meantime, the Russians and the Americans are going to move forward, talking to each other about the framework of the peace, which will be presented to the Ukrainians and which they will have to agree to. So the Russians are not trusting anybody. They're not trusting Trump. Then they probably like him. They probably sense that this man has good intentions, but they know perfectly well that in 4 years' time he'll be gone. And they also know perfectly well that he's got lots of opponents in the United States. They're not giving anything away. So, you know, I don't think the Russians need your advice. I mean, it's good that you highlight this fact on our lives, because it's important for us to be reminded of this. But I don't think Putin, who's, by the way, delivered a very powerful speech to a group of industrialists about how Russia should not expect sanctions relief, any substantive sanctions relief. I don't think the Russians are fooled, or at least, are naive at all about this process going forward.
Explain why it's important, Alexander, for
Iranian nuclear facilities have gone on high alert as fears of a coordinated Israeli-US strike intensify amid escalating regional tensions. Defense systems surrounding key sites have been significantly reinforced as Iran braces for possible military action. US intelligence has warned both the Biden and Trump administrations that Israel would likely target Iranian nuclear sites this year. This comes after Iran launched 200 missiles at Israel in October, prompting immediate Israeli retaliation through targeted airstrikes. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has declared that with Trump's support, his government would finish the job with Iran. But what exactly does finishing the job mean for regional stability and American involvement? What capabilities does Iran truly possess to defend against such an attack? Iranian officials have deployed additional air defense system launchers around key nuclear and missile facilities. However, these same officials privately acknowledge their systems may not withstand a large-scale assault, especially after being weakened by previous Israeli operations. Iran currently possesses Russian S-300 missile systems and is pressuring Moscow to expedite delivery of more advanced S-400s to bolster its defensive capabilities. Despite these efforts, military analysts suggest Iran remains vulnerable to coordinated strikes targeting its nuclear infrastructure. The environmental impact of attacking nuclear facilities could create a humanitarian crisis beyond Iran's borders. Former Fox News host Tucker Carlson has issued a stark warning to President Trump, stating that bombing Iran would set off a war that would result in thousands of American deaths. Carlson referenced Pentagon estimates predicting significant casualties and financial costs should the US become directly involved. Qatar's foreign minister has raised alarming concerns about water security, warning that Persian Gulf countries could run out of drinking water within 3 days if Iran's nuclear facilities are attacked. Contamination from damaged sites could affect water supplies in Qatar, Kuwait, and the UAE, creating a regional humanitarian emergency. This warning comes as Iran faces increasing isolation due to the weakening of its proxy networks. Hamas and Hezbollah have suffered major setbacks, while Iran's main ally Bashar al-Assad has lost influence across the region. The International Atomic Energy Agency reports Iran now possesses enough 60% enriched uranium to produce 6 nuclear weapons, if further enriched. This accelerated accumulation has heightened concerns among Western powers and Israel about Iran's nuclear ambitions. Trump has previously threatened Iran with great force and total obliteration in response to various incidents, including the assassination of Iranian military officer Qasem Soleimani and Houthi attacks on vessels in the Red Sea. U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz recently stated that all options are on the table to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. Waltz demanded that Iran give up all aspects of its nuclear program, including missile development and uranium enrichment. Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei responded defiantly, claiming, "If we wanted to develop nuclear weapons, America would not have been able to stop us." He rejected potential negotiations with the United States, insisting they would only increase pressure on Iran. So what does this rising tension mean for regional security? Military experts suggest Israel faces significant challenges in striking Iran's nuclear program. Unlike previous successful operations against single reactors in Iraq and Syria, Iran's nuclear facilities are numerous, widely dispersed, and deeply buried. Any strike would require exceptional planning, resources, and likely American support. The consequences could reshape Middle Eastern alliances and potentially draw the United States into direct conflict with Iran, despite warnings from figures like Tucker Carlson. As defense systems remain on high alert and rhetoric escalates, the question remains whether diplomatic solutions can prevail before military action becomes inevitable.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Dr. Paul is not in today. He's out for the day. So I will be conducting one of my little briefings on things that I think are important. And the theme for today's show is, has Trump lost the plot? And we all know how it started. We were all very excited. Trump took power, and it was like a freight train going through government. All of a sudden, we were getting a look at the way the sausage was made. We were getting a look behind the screen at what was going on in places like USAID, that the propaganda had told the American people was just doing our bidding overseas, just helping poor people, earthquake victims and such. The reality is it was an absolute octopus with its fingers in every country across the world, promoting agendas that most Americans didn't agree with, but were forced to pay for. And we saw the firing of the massive majority of the people at USAID. And most of us cheered because some of us who have been talking about it for years, understood not just USAID, but the National Endowment for Democracy, the National Democratic Institute, the International Republican Institute, all of the foreign intervention, regime change, regime destruction mechanisms that the US government employed overseas had been exposed by the Trump administration. And not only that, but within the administration itself, within the executive branch itself, we got to look at exactly what people were doing who were on the federal payroll, and it wasn't much. First of all, they didn't go to work. They didn't show up to work. They were moonlighting. They were daylighting. They were taking 2 or 3 jobs and what have you while on the government salary, didn't want to go back in. And when they were gone, they weren't missed. And so we saw many thousands of them fired. We've reported on this show about what happened to the real estate market in Washington, D.C. area, the greater Washington, D.C. area. A lot of houses on the market because the gravy train was slowing down a little bit. And all of us were cheering because this is what Trump promised to do. Now, he was getting his toes wet in the Ukraine-Russia crisis war, which in fact was a U.S. war against Russia using Ukraine as a proxy. That's what President Biden's team intended, because all of his experts, so-called experts, have been involved in trying to take down Russia since at least 2014, when they were all working for Obama. We're talking about people like Blinken and Sullivan, Victoria Nuland. They were all involved in it, and they just restarted their efforts when Biden came into power. As we know, Biden can't even sign his name, so they took over. The cat was away, so the mice did play. So we thought that maybe, perhaps, he had two choices in front of him. Was he going to own Biden's idiotic war, or was he going to come in and say, this is not my war, this is not my issue. I campaigned on ending wars and peace. I'm not going to get involved. We're pulling out all of American support for this war in Ukraine, this proxy war, and it'll be over soon. We thought he might do that. He gave some indications, and to be fair, there were some very positive developments. Having a phone call with Putin is very important because under the Biden administration, there was no communication. And with a lack of communication, with a lack of diplomatic activity, even with countries you don't get along with, there's always a risk, especially when they're superpowers, there's always the risk of a misunderstanding having extremely dire consequences. And so we don't want that. So the fact that he picked up the phone is great. And we hope there will be a phone call today, and we're waiting to see what happens with the phone call. But unfortunately, he went much further than that, much further than just trying to be a broker and try to end the war. He's getting involved. He's making proposals. He's telling Russia, you need to stop shooting for 30 days. To which President Putin said, well, what's going to happen in those 30 days? Is Ukraine going to rearm? Are they going to pull their troops out where they're surrounded? This is a complicated issue. You can't just, we're on the offensive. We're moving ahead, and you're telling us we got to stop. So he got more involved in this. He's made some proposals that, quite frankly, are bizarre, and they won't go forward. But in the meantime, as he does this, he lifted the hold on weapons and intel to Ukraine. That just happened a few days ago. So at that moment, that became his war. That's when he fully jumped into that bathtub and put himself into it. And it's a real problem. And it's not what Americans wanted. So unfortunately, we're seeing that continue. I'm going to put up this first clip now. This is anticipation of today's phone call. And I have highlighted Bloomberg is reporting to indicate my lack of confidence in Bloomberg. Nevertheless, this is what's on the plate, so we have to try to digest it. Putin demands halt to all Western arms for Ukraine ahead of Trump call. I don't believe that President Putin called up Bloomberg before they called up Trump, so this is just speculation. We'll leave it at that. But one of the things that they apparently are suggesting is that this will be one of the demands. Now go to the next one. Here's Bloomberg further speculating, because these are according to Russian sources. So take that with a very, very large grain of salt. The first one is demanding suspension of weapons deliveries to Ukraine. Ahead of his call with Trump, Putin has made it prerequisite for Russia signing up to a truce, said a senior European official. There we go. Senior European official and three people in Moscow familiar with Russia's position. Classic Bloomberg, classic mainstream media. Nevertheless, we'll take it on board. While Russia wants to halt all arms delivery, its minimum is that the U.S. military aid should stop. Two of the people said, we don't know who they are. So there you go. Senior European officials said Europe was extremely reluctant to agree to the demand. Well, I think that we can probably go ahead and say is pretty likely, because Macron and the the gentleman from the UK, Keir Starmer, they believe that they are going to march into Ukraine with or without Russia's permission. That should be interesting to watch. Unfortunately, the soldiers that are going to get killed will not be that interesting. So what else do we have here? The suspension of arms supplies sought by Putin would be lifted after a final peace accord. So this is the whole sort of Ukraine argument Trump has taken on board, which is that we need to ceasefire first, and then we need to have talks. Of course, that favors the side that is on the defensive, which clearly Ukraine is on the defensive. Even the New York Times has reported that they're holding on to a very tiny sliver of Kursk. So all this is to say that what started out very promising is now President Trump sinking into the mire, sinking into what happens to it seems to me, all presidencies, which is the allure of somehow being the king of the world. And what that entails is getting involved in wars and sucking the United States down into these wars. So on the one hand, we have this going on with Russia. President Trump doesn't need to have a ton of phone calls with Putin about Ukraine. Now, there's a lot to talk about. And if any of you have watched Tucker Carlson yesterday, had our good friend Rick Sanchez on talking about the Biden administration's 11th hour banning of Russian media in the U.S., which is against the First Amendment. So there's a lot to talk about. There's sanctions to talk about. There is cooperation to talk about. There's reducing tension to talk about. There's plenty of stuff, but Ukraine, in my opinion, is not one of those things, in the opinion of many people. So, but that's not all. So here he bites off a big piece of Ukraine. And then what does he do? Well, to their credit, Steve Witkoff went over there and he told Netanyahu, we need a deal. He did it right off very early. Stop bombing Gaza. Let's have a multi-part deal that will result in the resolution of the crisis in Gaza to a degree. There's other aspects to it. So you had this deal in place. Netanyahu began implementing phase one. The fighting stopped. The Houthis stopped attacking Israeli ships. Everything seemed to be moving in the right direction. But of course, then Netanyahu, as he is wont to do, said, well, I don't want to go on to phase two. Maybe we can extend phase one a little longer. Phase two involved, each side giving more concessions, release of more hostages held by Hamas, and in exchange for an extended ceasefire and the removal of Israeli troops from Gaza. He didn't want to move on to that phase, and so he held it up. And not only did he hold that up, but he held up humanitarian assistance for the people of Gaza who'd had their houses blown up, the water infrastructure blown up, everything's blown up there, and they wouldn't even let any humanitarian aid through. So that's when, of course, the Houthis said, "Hey, this is not good. If you keep this blockade up, we're going to start hitting your ships again, Israel." And to which Trump responded, again, as I said, with Russia taking on a war that Biden started. That's not our war. And if you go to the next one, here was the response, and it happened last night, and it's absolutely disgusting. Israel said, "Okay, it's obvious that the U.S. has our back. The U.S. bombed the Houthis, so we are going to go ahead and return to what we like best, which is killing women and children in Gaza." This is Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com, who writes, Israel restarts large-scale bombing of Gaza. Over 400 killed. Many of the dead are children, as Israel is hitting homes and tents, sheltering displaced Palestinians. First, they blew up the homes, then they set up tents, and they blew up the tents. And Dave writes, the Israeli military on Tuesday morning began launching large-scale airstrikes on the besieged Gaza Strip, making the full-scale resumption of Israel's genocidal war around 1 p.m. Gaza time. Al Jazeera reported that 404 Palestinians had been killed, 562 wounded by Israeli strikes on homes and tents. Homes and tents, guys. So go to the next one from Dave's article, same article. And I did not put any of these photos up because I don't want to do it. You can easily find them yourself on X. But pictures and videos from Gaza have surfaced online showing that there is a large number of child casualties. Israeli bombardment has returned to Gaza, bringing massacres with it once again. Al Jazeera reporter wrote on X, the bodies of children killed in their sleep lay scattered in the aftermath. The massive attack came about 2 weeks after Israel imposed a total blockade on aid and other goods entering Gaza. So you starve them for 2 weeks and then you kill them in their sleep. Good move. Go to the next one. Hamas told Reuters that Israel had chosen to end the ceasefire unilaterally and that Israel's attacks exposed the remaining Israeli hostages to unknown fate. But Netanyahu says something different. If you go to the next one, he said Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu said in a statement Tuesday morning that he instructed the Israeli military to escalate in Gaza in response to Hamas rejecting U.S. and Israeli terms for an extended temporary ceasefire. That, of course, is not true. As far as I understand it, what Netanyahu wanted was to extend phase one. And the original deal said, no, we go to phase two at this point. It was supposed to go to phase two, I believe, on the 1st of March. So there you have it. We're back into Biden's policy in Gaza and Israel. We're back to Biden's policy when it comes to Yemen and bombing Yemen. We're back to Biden's policy when it comes to Russia. And now, to add insult to injury, literally, that's a kind of an understatement. If you hit the next one. Now, Dave also wrote about this. The U.S. and Israel are considering expelling Gaza Palestinians to Syria. Now, remember a couple of weeks ago when Trump came up with this amazing plan to get all the people out of Gaza and turn it into some sort of weird resort. He was genuinely surprised that the rest of the world was appalled at such a suggestion. I don't think anyone on his advisory team, maybe he didn't have the courage to say, Mr. President, this is an absolutely insane idea to ethnically cleanse an entire area. Nevertheless, they've come up with a new plan. They want to send them to Syria. Because why? Because U.S.-backed Al-Qaeda are now in charge of Syria. Now, this is another Obama disaster, the whole overthrow of Syria that the Biden administration had continued. Now, Trump lobbed a few bombs over there while he was president, but he never became that awfully involved. It looks like with these moves, he's doing so. Now, if you go to the next one, this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that a source from the region told CBS that the HTS, now that's Al-Qaeda renamed, with suits on, led government has been approached through a Syrian official. They denied any knowledge of the proposal. President Trump repeatedly called for the permanent removal of Palestinians from Gaza. He did walk that back a few days ago, if you heard that, when someone asked him, are you talking about not letting them back? And he wavered on that, which he's wont to do. I mean, he does this all the time, unfortunately. But no, it shouldn't be a shock. Overnight, when you kill 400 people, go to the next one. This is Israeli newspaper Haaretz, which actually discusses the situation in Gaza much more objectively than any of the U.S. media. There's more of a debate in Israel, of course, than there is in the United States. Israel faces wave of international condemnation following renewal of Gaza hostility. Following Israeli airstrikes on Tuesday, countries including Ireland, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia, as well as UN bodies, shared their disdain the renewal of hostilities in Gaza as Israel faces calls to reinstate a ceasefire. So there you have him returning to this policy with regard to Gaza. And Israel shouldn't be surprised because his top advisors are fanatically pro-Israel, and there's no one that we can recognize on his team, certainly among the senior level, who would say, Mr. President, this is not a good idea. But as if that is not enough, with the Houthi attack by the United States over the weekend, we discussed it with Dr. Paul yesterday. What that means is, in fact, Trump and his people ramping up for a war with Iran. So yet another war. Go to the next one. This is actually up today on the Ron Paul Institute website. M.K. Badrakumar, who is a retired Indian ambassador, who, if you read the Ron Paul Institute website, you will know that I publish him as often as I can. I've been reading him probably for 15 years or longer. I find his insights to be very, very refreshing and very, very sober and clear-headed. So here's what Badrakumar writes about what's going on with Trump in Iran. Now go to the next one. He says, on Saturday, U.S. President Donald Trump ordered the Pentagon to launch a decisive and powerful military operation against the Houthis of Yemen with overwhelming lethal force in the most significant military action of his second term to date. Very, very, very big military operation. I don't have the clip, but I was just looking at X, and Scott Ritter, good friend of the Institute, spoke at one of our conferences. He commented on this this powerful and decisive military operation. He said most of the targets are probably guesswork, and he's an intel officer, so I'm sure he knows. The attacks began on Saturday and continued into Sunday at the Yemeni capital of Sana'a and in other areas, reportedly killing 31 people and wounding 101 so far, most of them children and women. And we've seen the photos. We won't show them here. You can find them. I think that 31 number, I think it's at least double that now, if I'm not mistaken. Now, Badrakumar, who actually is a diplomat, unlike most American diplomats, made a value judgment, and I think it's absolutely correct. If you are a human being with a soul, go to the next one. And this is what Badrakumar said. Ambassador Badrakumar said, such wanton killing of defenseless women and children can only be seen as an act of cowardice. Trump has blood on his hand. Trump wrote on Truth Social addressing the Houthis, your time is up and your attacks must stop starting today. If they don't, hell will rain down on you, upon you like nothing you've ever seen before. Well, as we've discussed on this program, there weren't any attacks. They had not started up their attacks, and their attacks were only aimed at Israeli ships in response to Israel's slaughter of Gaza. It was only the U.S. started bombing them that they said, okay, well, we'll take out your ships too if you want to play that game. But that wasn't where it ended. If you go to the next, when thereupon Trump abruptly digressed, this is Ambassador Barakmar, and addressed Iran, that it needed to immediately stop supporting the Houthis, which of course there's little evidence that it does in a very substantial way. Nevertheless, he threatened, America will hold you fully accountable, and we won't be nice about it. So that's a clear warning to Iran. We talked about it yesterday, that the National Security Advisor Mike Waltz also threatened Iranian ships. So what is going on here? This is kind of what happened in President Trump's first term. He put a bunch of warmongers around him who are obsessed with fixing the Middle East, and they have their own preferences there. They're very, very strong devotion to the state of Israel, and that sort of seems to guide all of their policies. It may guide their policies, but from Iraq to Libya, etc., when they listen to the admonitions of people like Benjamin Netanyahu, all they do is they suck us into wars that we don't need to be in. And again, that seems to be the case. Netanyahu wants nothing more than having Donald Trump fight his war against Iran. You guys go fight and help us out. And that seems to be what they're doing now. Now, there's a lot of speculation as to why all of a sudden in the Middle East, there seems to be a conflagration of serious threats of war. Some people, Thomas Massey included, and I think there's probably a lot of truth to it, are speculating that's because of the war in Ukraine is winding down. Russia is winning the war. They've closed the Kursk adventure off, and they're moving into northern Ukraine in the middle part there to take more territory as a buffer. As that winds down, the military-industrial complex is looking around for a new enemy. They need to keep the dollars flowing, and so they think a war with Iran might be just what the doctor ordered. I think that's a good point. Now, a good friend of ours, Patrick Henningsen, had a tweet out today where he really took it to Secretary of State Rubio, who I have to say I was pleasantly surprised at some of the first things he was saying. I think that's when he was Secretary of State. And Henningsen, and we'll go ahead and put that up because I will say I think I agree with what he says. I don't know if we can make that text any bigger. My eyes are failing this morning. I'm going to try to read it on the screen. But anyway, here's what Patrick wrote. He said, it's now abundantly clear that Marco Rubio has fumbled the so-called ceasefire deals in Ukraine and Gaza. A complete failure on both counts. I think we lost the picture. We can get it back up there. A complete failure on both counts. The Rubio picture, if we can get it up there. Henningsen, thank you. A complete failure on both counts. Now he's fronting an additional war with Yemen and singling attack on Iran. Rather than do his job, he's more preoccupied with attacking student protesters on U.S. college campuses and attacking the First Amendment, presumably on behalf of the Israeli lobby, than actually doing his job as our top diplomat overseas. He's been trying to pretend to be Secretary of State for the last month, but the act wore thin already, and now he's back to little Senator Rubio, a petty partisan operative under the thumb of a clueless Trump, and whose top priority is carrying water for AIPAC, Miriam Adelson, and his mentor, Paul Singer. A catastrophic failure. Very, very cutting from Patrick, who actually was an intern at RPI a few years ago. But I think, unfortunately, I think he's got a good point here. I don't think Rubio, the Rubio that we saw when he first went into the seat, is not the Rubio we're seeing right now. And he may well be gone soon. Who knows? Now, who is President Trump listening to? Obviously, people like Rubio, definitely people like Waltz and others who are very, very hawkish. Hegseth is very, very hawkish. He wants more war on Yemen. Who should President Trump be listening to? It's easy, Mr. President. You don't have to go. You can take that down. You don't have to go down this path. You don't have to go down to. You don't have to be a wartime president. You know, there's this allure, there's this siren song sucking you into it. It's not necessary. It's not necessary. You need to stop. Americans were happy with what you're doing. Every poll shows that Americans do not want another war. They do not want us to get more involved overseas, both Republicans and Democrats. They want less U.S. involvement overseas. So who should you be listening to? Even very pro-Israel people like Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene understands that we have to put our interests first. Put that next tweet up. Now, she just put, or X post up. This is great, MTG. She gets it. She says, I have not heard a single American say they want another war in the Middle East or anywhere else. No one. All I've heard is a loud cry demanding our government leaders, our government and its leaders put America first. I don't support going to war on behalf of other countries. I support peace and fixing our own massive problems for our own people. It's literally my job title, U.S. Representative. And I don't have it here, but Thomas Massie reposted this with 100% over it. Very, very good sentiment by someone who, as I said, otherwise very much supports Israel, but she understands it's not going to do anyone any favors. Now go to the next one. Speaking of Thomas Massie, he also has some great advice for the president. He starts out saying, who wouldn't be for blasting some nasty pirate to smithereens? Here's the problem. It's not about pirates or protecting China's shipping lanes to Europe. We're being conditioned to forget everything we learned from Iraq and Afghanistan. These are not our wars. Bingo, you said it. And one more, someone who definitely deserves to be listened to, and that is someone I mentioned earlier in the show, Tucker Carlson. He posts late yesterday, it's worth pointing out that a strike on the Iranian nuclear sites will almost certainly result in thousands of American deaths at bases throughout the Middle East and cost the United States tens of billions of dollars. The cost of future acts of terrorism on American soil may be even higher. These aren't guesses. These are the Pentagon's own estimates. A bombing campaign against Iran will set off a war, and it will be America's war. Don't let the propagandists lie to you. Very, very important. We're saving some money by shutting down these superfluous agencies and sending home people who do nothing but lay around and take our money. That's going to be a drop in the bucket compared to what it's going to cost for a new war. What we're already spending propping up Israel's war in the Middle East, billions of dollars. If we go after Iran, as Tucker Carlson very rightly said, hundreds of billions of dollars and thousands of lives in a war that in no way is ours. So, President Trump, pull yourself back from the abyss. Sober up. Stop writing these crazy posts. Stop being so rabid in your responses. Take a deep breath. Fire some people. Bring in some better people. Bring Danny Davis back in to help out with Tulsi Gabbard. Bring some others in. You don't have to go down this path. Your presidency right now is at risk. There are people who want you to succeed, but who will criticize you when they can see clearly that you're going down the wrong path. I don't presume that you're watching this, but if you are, and anyway, this may be the last time I do say this, but go on to that last clip because we're going to talk about all of these things this weekend at the Ron Paul Institute Conference down here in Lake Jackson, America in the Age of Trump 2.0. I could have put a subtitle of The Good, Bad, and the Ugly, but we'll leave it at that because there is good, there is bad, and there is ugly, and we've talked about most all of it today. Great speakers, Tom Woods, our good friend, David Stockman on the board of the Institute, Jeff Dice, great friend of ours, my former colleague in Ron Paul's legislative office, former U.S. Representative John Duncan, who has the distinction of being one of the famous 6 Republicans who voted against the Iraq War back in 2002, and of course, Ron Paul, all speaking and taking an assessment of the early part of the Trump presidency. You're going to want to be there. I'll put a clip there. We are getting close to capacity, guys, but there are a few tickets left, especially you folks in Texas. Come on down. Check us out in Lake Jackson. And I want to finally thank all of you. I can take that down. Thank you very much for tuning in to the Liberty Report.
And odd news stories, and as always, let's go ahead and get right into today's video. Now, am I the only one that felt like there was something off about this eclipse that happened between the 13th and the 14th of this month? For some people, or maybe a lot of people, this may have been just your normal every other day and you did not notice anything outside the norm. But for me, not only did I hear something, but I also felt something and I also saw something. And stupid me, once again, I did not have my phone on me. My phone was at home charging, so I couldn't record what I had saw. Thankfully, though, someone else had recorded what I had saw. Multiple people did. But anyway, I was outside walking my dog. You could hear the usual animal noises. You could hear things chirping. You could hear dogs across the street and so forth. And then all of a sudden, there was complete silence. You could not hear anything. And the temperature dropped. It became cold. For whatever reason, my dog would not continue to walk. He would not budge. He just laid right down. I look up. The moon is completely red, but not just that. I also see about a dozen of these giant tadpole-looking things, or they look like worms, which is pretty interesting given the fact that the moon is called a blood worm moon. But these things were floating all throughout the sky. They looked like they were floating throughout the sky as if they were swimming. It was really the strangest thing. They did not look like bats. They did not look like birds. It was just very strange. They look like flying serpents. Matter of fact, looking back on it, they actually remind me of those things that I have been talking about on this channel for quite some time now. For example, like that black slithery thing that was seen flying in the sky above Texas during the April 8th solar eclipse. The way these things, again, look like some sort of tadpole or some sort of worm, I don't know if these are the babies of these black flying things or what, but they look very, very unusual. You would have to see it with your own eyes to really grasp what they look like. But after they disappeared, moments after they disappeared, I could hear sound again. I could hear things chirping. My dog wanted to continue walking. It's like everything went right back to normal. So I instantly went right back home to grab my phone, went right back outside to see if I could spot these things again, and I could not. They were gone. But the very next day, I was searching the blood moon on TikTok and Twitter, and I found video footage of these things. This video footage was uploaded by Carla Camacho 214 on TikTok. There are also people in the comment section of her video that are also saying they've noticed this too. Like this individual here saying, I just noticed the pictures I took last night of the moon have that too. And someone else replied, yup, me too. This person says, I saw that in Arlington, Texas too. Another person replied, so I wasn't the only one. We saw that too. And my husband said, someone will investigate and post on TikTok. TikTok information are more accurate and fast. Okay, I saw it too. Might be crazy, but I saw it. I saw it too. Wasn't sure. So anyway, multiple people had witnessed this. This other person here, just 22990, had also recorded them and uploaded it to TikTok. Now, I don't know if these things have any connection to the moon or the blood worm moon, no matter what you want to call it, because something very similar to this was seen about a month ago back in February. This video comes from the Paranormal Chick on TikTok.
This video is completely crazy. Like this is an amazing video, honestly. This was captured by a man named Chris Manhattan out of West Virginia on around the night of February 28th, 2025. They capture a group of UFOs, but not just your normal UFO sighting or drone sighting, however you want to call them. This looks like computer code in the sky. It looks like they're trying to form a message, but I have no idea what that message is. So anybody watching this, if you can decipher it, let the rest of us know. I've never seen this before. Take a look at this. Tell me what you think.
Good eye. Oh shit! What the fuck? What the hell?
And again, I don't know if these things here were the same things that were witnessed during the blood moon, but also something interesting to note that every time those black flying things, those serpent-like things were seen flying in the skies, either that exact same day or a day later, there is a very big event. For example, like I said, the very first time one of them appeared was during the April 8th solar eclipse, but they were flooding the skies above Los Angeles as those fires were raging. And not just that, like I said, they also appeared during other events. Last year, there were very bad tornadoes, horrific tornadoes that broke out in the Midwest, and one of them had also appeared during a news segment while this reporter was talking about those tornadoes. And if you notice, after this eclipse, there has been very terrifying weather throughout the United States. I do believe it was either a day after, either the 14th or the 15th, where terrifying tornadoes were breaking out through the United States. And I was reading news articles that 33 people had lost their lives due to this extreme weather. Just listen to this news report. There were severe tornadoes, severe thunderstorms, wildfires.
We are going to begin, though, with extreme weather in the South and Midwest. Over the weekend, at least 40 people were across 7 states in a system that brought high winds, rain, tornadoes, and even wildfires. In one town in Alabama, a tornado lifted a school bus onto the roof of a building. That's right. But fortunately, there was no one inside. We've got coverage throughout the region. We'll start with Jason Allen in Missouri. Jason, good morning.
Nate, good morning. This destruction you see here is from one of the 13 tornadoes that state officials say touched down here. A dozen people were. This pile of debris that's back here, some of these homes that took a direct hit in this community were picked up and thrown 50 or 60 feet into all of this.
Oh my God.
A severe storm system has pummeled the country, leaving a path of destruction.
Right here is where my room is.
9-year-old Alea Contreras convinced her family to evacuate their home in Poplar Bluff, Missouri, before a tornado barreled through Friday night.
I was like, we've stayed here through several tornadoes. It'll be fine. And then she's like, no, Mom, we need to leave.
Alea's mom, Kelsey Webb, heeded her third grader's warning, driving away minutes before the tornado hit.
You feel pretty lucky that something inside you this time told you to leave?
Yeah, we wouldn't be alive.
Dozens across the country have in the storm. In St. Louis, tornadoes ripped apart homes and businesses and flipped over tractor trailers. Winds up to 80 miles per hour gusted through the South and Midwest, with tornadoes tearing down homes in Louisiana and ripping trees from the ground in Arkansas. Hundreds of thousands are without power across the country. A state of emergency was declared in several states, including Alabama, where a tornado threw a bus on top of a school building. In Oklahoma, wildfires ripped through the state, fueled by strong winds and dry conditions. Crews are still battling the fires, many forced to evacuate, with 130 fires reported across the state. Deer were seen fleeing the flames.
It still doesn't feel real.
Kelsey Webb is urging her children to see the good through the destruction.
We're all okay. We're not injured. We're alive. All the stuff can be replaced.
This is another community where not everyone had insurance. So, Adriana, people have been picking through all of this, trying to save what they can, and then figuring out how to start over.
No insurance, Jason. How horrible. Thank you so much for that report.
I have no idea what these things are, but every time they appear, it seems like they either come with chaos or chaos again happens only a couple days or even a day after they make their appearance. Moving on to a completely different segment that has nothing to do with the last video. For quite some time now, I have been talking about power outages, a blackout, and how the so-called powers that be have been hinting to a massive blackout. Well, in my most recent video, I included a segment about how every time Mountain Dew releases a new flavor. Now look, I had to reply to these comments. Yes, Mountain Dew has a plethora of different flavors, a ton. But it seems like every time they focus on a specific flavor more so than the other flavors, like for example, their most recent flavor, they even did a TED Talk about it, then it seems like something happens not too long after that correlates with that specific flavor, like a big event. The so-called powers that be, they love to drop little hints and clues in everything we consume. They love to do predictive programming, subliminal messages, and things we consume like movies, video games, TV shows, music videos, down to even food commercials. Now, and you don't believe these companies like PepsiCo aren't run by members of the Free People Society. The founder of PepsiCo was a member of the Free People Society. In Barack Obama's scripted movie, Leave the World Behind, I broke down all the signs and symbolism, and I came to a conclusion that that movie is telling you all of the events inside that movie were being controlled by the Free People Society, the Luciferians. But anyway, going back to that Mountain Dew flavor, which is called Baja Midnight, I said that this is a hint to a great blackout, a great power outage. Well, what happened one day after I dropped that video? Panama, Venezuela, and Cuba, they have all now been under, at the same time, a massive power outage. What is wild is that the news is not really talking about it. All three locations at the exact same time are in a blackout. Went down. Now, when it comes to Cuba, Cuba has been facing power outages off and on for, I believe, the last couple months. But on the 15th, millions were without power after a substation failure. When it comes to Panama, there was a massive blackout after a fire at a power plant. It also hit their water supply as well. When it comes to Venezuela, I can't find much information as to what caused their blackout. So if anybody knows, please do go ahead and comment below. But it wasn't just these three locations. There were also multiple locations within the United States that were and still are facing complete blackouts, from Pennsylvania to Texas to the Carolinas, Alabama, and so forth. Many people are without power. And Cuba, Venezuela, Panama, all of them together, just so many people are without power, and that train did not fail to arrive when it comes to the symbolism, when it comes to the hidden messages in different forms of media. They always come to fruition. They are always telling us what they're about to do ahead of time, no matter if it's in a movie or a TV show like The Simpsons or on a soda can. All of these organizations are run by the same groups.
Red. Just about 3 months following its release, a code red rung out in New York City on September. In 2013, they first introduced the flavor pitch black. Remember that? Do you remember what happened after that? Well, just about 3 months later, the largest IT blackout occurred, outages of the 911 emergency systems, and even a blackout at the Super Bowl 2013. It keeps getting even more and more interesting, friends, because we had the Maui Burst flavor released in 2023. And you all know we talked about that one before, because it was just 3 months later in Hawaii, the Hawaiians experienced the Maui wildfires and Lahaina wildfires. They certainly were hit by a burst, what did they call it? The Maui burst. They were certainly hit with the burst, but was it a Maui burst?
Thank you so much for watching. If you like this channel and you want to see more
Powerful tornadoes are once again ripping through this country. And as I watch this wave of devastation unfold, I can't help but be reminded of the incredible events that happened in Joplin, Missouri back in May of 2011. An event so extraordinary that it left survivors convinced that heavenly beings intervened in a moment of desperation. You've probably heard of guardian angels. I mean, who hasn't, right? But what about angels actually steering tornadoes, shielding people from harm, and appearing vividly in broad daylight? I mean, it sounds unbelievable. It sounds like it's made up stories, but it's not, because multiple eyewitness testimonies from that tragic day tell us exactly what happened. And today we're going to talk about that. This is the butterfly people of Joplin, Missouri. So on May 22nd, 2011, Joplin was struck by one of the deadliest EF5 tornadoes in American history. It basically flattened entire neighborhoods. It claimed over 150 lives and left thousands of people homeless. Yet during the unimaginable destruction of this tornado, something miraculous happened. Survivors, especially children, began reporting that angelic figures, which were called the butterfly people, appeared to them during the tornado and even shielded them from deadly debris, and sometimes even seemingly redirecting the path of the storm itself. It's interesting, huh? Have you heard about this? So, for instance, one account, a young boy named Mason Lillard, he took shelter inside of a pickup truck. When the tornado's winds approached the truck, he recalls clearly seeing bright winged beings surrounding him and protecting the truck, protecting him and his family in the truck. These beings shielded them from the debris that was flying through the air. He described these beings as beautiful, human-like, comforting. Another story comes from a little child named Eli Morgan. He was trapped inside of a vehicle and survived the storm. And later on, Eli insisted that an angel had physically pulled him to safety. Also, a man named Joe was driving down the road at the time, and he recounted seeing vividly, several winged beings that were human-looking. They were above the street, they were floating. And he said that they literally appeared to direct and deflect the winds away from populated areas. Joe was adamant about what he saw. He described the beings as angels in a storm, powerfully guiding the storm and turning the tornado's trajectory. These reports came so widespread that even local pastors began openly discussing them. One pastor, his name is Pastor Wermuth, I believe it was, of the Lutheran church there. He recounted multiple firsthand stories from his congregation. Families started telling him repeatedly about angelic beings that physically shielded them during the storm and even guiding them to safety. In fact, the descriptions were so detailed and similar to each other that it makes it really hard to deny. There's multiple unrelated witness testimonies that corroborate this phenomenon. It became accepted as a spiritual miracle by many within the community. So skeptics, obviously skeptics, they try to dismiss these encounters as hallucinations or trauma-based delusions or something like that. But here's the thing, guys. The sheer volume and consistency of the stories debunk that. Because how could they be trauma-based delusions if everybody's saying the same story? I know people who haven't experienced something like this might just, oh, well, this is impossible. Well, it's not impossible to these people. It's not impossible to the people who had it happen to them, is it? No. They're not seeking attention. They're just simply sharing what they had seen and experienced firsthand during one of the worst moments of their life, or maybe even the worst moments of their lives. So there's a lot of resources on the Joplin butterfly people if you want to deep dive into it. There's many articles written about it. There's a documentary written about it, and there's a lot of other resources that you can look at. However, I did find this article here from the Daily Herald, and we're going to read it right now because there's some really interesting stuff in here. Quote, May 22nd, 2011 is a date that most people around the town of Joplin, Missouri remember very well. It was on that day that an F5 tornado destroyed 900 homes and killed 161 people and left a landscape behind that resembled a foreign landscape on a barren planet. I remember watching the TV as images of the devastation were shown. It was of particular interest to me because the church denomination that I attended in my childhood had its headquarters in Joplin. The town's population is overwhelmingly Christian. Who would have thought? What I didn't see on the mainstream media was descriptions of the butterfly people. The TV series Monsters and Mysteries in America had a short documentary about these apparitions just last Sunday. Side note, this article is from April 27, 2021. The stories were told mainly by small children to parents in the hospital waiting rooms, standing in lines for water or donated food, and to the Red Cross counselors. Multiple children of varied ethnicities and socioeconomic status told eerily similar stories of seeing beautiful humanoid creatures with wings hovering above certain children and parents in the storm in a protective manner. They were described as colorful and pretty, so children called them the butterfly people. Most of these stories had common elements. The tornado hit their home. Often parents were praying. The roof was ripped off. Children saw the butterfly person descending down from the sky and covering them with their wings. Those particular children usually emerged from the wreckage in good condition. Another version states that children saw butterfly people carrying other adults up into the heavens, the ones that did not make it out alive, presumably their souls. About one half of the children were counseled at Joplin Child Trauma Treatment Centers set up in the schools after. The clinical director, Daniel Robinson, heard these stories firsthand from many of the children. Many of these children stated that they somehow knew that these butterfly people were there to calm them and to keep them safe. Todd C. Frankel of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch wrote an article about these apparitions entitled The Butterfly People of Joplin. It was December 19th, 2011. He described former newspaper reporter Marta Churchwell's investigation and interviews with these people. Marta is a natural skeptic and did not believe in angels. After numerous interviews, she cannot discount the possibility that so many children who did not know each other told similar stories. A book was written about these interviews entitled Butterflies at the Window, a story of the butterfly people and miracles in the storm. It was written by Mrs. Sandy J. Reynolds. A historical marker was erected for the butterfly people on Maiden Lane, North 26th Street and Gabby Boulevard. Butterfly murals came to dominate the town, along with butterfly sculptures, paintings, t-shirts, and business signs. Psychiatrists were quick to discount the phenomenon, of course they were, in the aftermath as simply a product of children's imagination due to stressful trauma, a way of helping them cope emotionally. That doesn't sound very convincing to me. All those children describing the same thing independently, a few parents saw them also. They gave their eyewitness testimonies on the TV show. One of them was a Red Cross volunteer lady who saw a butterfly person standing near a grieving family afterwards. I've always believed that small children and animals like dogs are able to see supernatural apparitions more readily than skeptical adults, perhaps because of their innocence and lack of formal education, which in our modern society is steeped in anti-supernaturalism. I've also heard of several eyewitness testimonies from friends who I knew who would not lie to me, who told me of seeing an angel. I find it interesting that most people in third world countries report supernatural phenomena like this rather routinely. It seems to be mainly in Western societies that all such reports are viewed with suspicion, a product of enlightenment and reliance on scientific community for the quote-unquote truth. Yeah, isn't that right? It's more compelling to me since these small children didn't have any theological training and didn't even know how to use the term angel. The adults had to figure that out. The Bible describes rather routinely and states even children have guardian angels. Amen to that. Why some people are killed and others protected and live is a deep question that is beyond my pay grade. My opinion is that if you are a skeptic and don't believe in prayer, then you are simply eliminating one possible avenue for help. These eyewitness accounts are fascinating to read. It's a shame that mainstream media avoid these eyewitness testimonies because of a fear of being made to look foolish or unprofessional. Perhaps it was best that the majority of these accounts were given by very small children who obviously were not colluding. It's really embarrassing and it looks unprofessional to ridicule small children for what they say they have seen. I think perhaps God intended it to be that way on May 22nd, 2011, end quote. Now this is very interesting, isn't it? And we know, I think it's Psalm 91:11 talks about how everybody's given a guardian angel. The incredible testimonies like the ones of the butterfly people in Joplin, in my opinion, they serve as a sort of spiritual reminder to keep your eyes open and to never dismiss events just because they defy explanation. But that's just my opinion. I want to know what you think about this. Please put a comment below and tell everybody how you feel. Tell everybody your opinion on the butterfly people. What do you think they are? Do you think they're just made up by these kids, or do you think they're real? Do you think they're angels from God? Please put your opinion below. And if you haven't done so already, please hit that like button. And we'll see you guys next time. God bless you all.
Coffee. Follow me.